Halloween in Hell, Michael vs. Pinhead, written by Josh Stolberg and Bobby Florsheim in 2002. 4 years after Dave Parker met with the Dimension exec, Stolberg and Florsheim met with Mustafa Akkad himself about the prospect of a Hellraiser/Halloween crossover. They had a highly detailed pitch with not only a treatment, but a way to market the film. The idea was to have the poster feature the two horror icons in a boxing ring, with fight stats, kill counts, and their weapons of choice, as well as the tagline reading, "This Halloween, they're gonna raise a little hell." But this is how it goes. Halloween in Hell opens outside Chicago with a support group for horror film survivors. Most notably in attendance are Kirsty Cotton and Jamie Lloyd. But other attendees include characters from films such as Critters, The Prophecy, Leprechaun, and Phantasm. Jamie explains the thorn curse to her peers and shares how it's been a terrible hardship for her. "I can't date. I can't hold down a job without everyone getting massacred. I have to keep a blood supply in the hospital for the next attack. He just keeps coming." She also mentions that it's been 7 months since the Shape last tried to kill her, which he tries again as the meeting ends. The other survivors rush to her defense, resulting in a giant melee. Holding the puzzle box, Kirsty dives in front of Jamie to deflect one of Michael's stabs. His blade pierces the box, the force of which fatally embeds into Kirsty's chest. Having been summoned by the stabbed box, Pinhead and the Cenobites arrive to find Kirsty dying. She uses her last breath to taunt her old adversary. "You never got me." Pinhead is furious that Kirsty has died by someone else's hand and vows revenge against her killer. He instructs his Cenobite followers, "Find out who did this. Her soul belonged to me. I will collect from someone." Having escaped the Shape's attack, Jamie heads for the nearby hospital where she has a personal blood supply on tap. After giving Jamie an infusion, her nurse gravely errors by returning her blood to general storage rather than her private stock. This gaffe results in 7 unfortunate people being given Jamie's cursed blood this evening, which makes them all automatic targets of the Shape. He can instinctively sense other members of his bloodline. Not only that, but Pinhead and the Cenobites have declared war on both Michael Myers and those in his bloodline. Jamie and the 7 transfusion recipients are now caught in the hellacious battle between a relentless slasher and literal demons. The motley crew of 7 are soon whittled down to just one, a hyper-intelligent 10-year-old named Betsy, who teams up with Jamie to stay alive. Jamie and Betsy wind up inside the spooky mansion of the monster-obsessed Horace Merriweather, who earlier stole the puzzle box from the hospital morgue. Horace reveals there are 160 lament configurations on Earth, and that he now possesses all of them. While they can't be used to kill Pinhead or the Shape, they can be used to trap both monsters in hell. To do this, the puzzle boxes must be combined in just the right manner, as though a Rubik's Cube made by Satan. They manage this uneasy task just as their monstrous pursuers close in, which opens a portal to hell. The final act unfolds with a showdown between the entire surviving cast in hell. The finale would kick an already exhilarant crossover into overdrive. As Stolberg and Florsheim pitched it, the unstoppable force is meeting the immovable object, and all hell is coming down around them. The Shape decapitates several Cenobites before moving in on Pinhead, even using his own chains against him. The slasher pulls out half of Pinhead's pins while shoving the other half further into his skull. The two titans battle it out until one emerges victorious. We'll address this later. The victor then sees Jamie and Betsy attempting to close the hell portal using the giant lament configuration. The girls manage this at just the last second, sealing the portal closed and their tormentors within it. An injured but still alive Jamie and Betsy limp away into the sunset. I think it's safe to say which one is the better idea. While not amazing by any means, it's definitely a lot more fun and obviously more fleshed out. Plus, it would have been interesting to see Jennifer Aniston and A. Michael Baldwin make cameos in the support group scene. It would have been great to see Jamie Lloyd again, especially if played by Danielle Harris, even if the bloodline thing is taken literally, which is a bit dumb. I like the sisterly dynamic similar to Halloween 4, but with Jamie taking the Rachel role and Betsy taking the Jamie role. I don't even mind that they go back to the Thorn Cult storyline, even if it's beyond stupid. The climax would have been fucking amazing with Pinhead and Michael duking it out though. It also says that there would have been a bit of comedy injected into the script, similar to Freddy vs. Jason, as well as a ripe abundance of horror references. Not just the opening scene, but with the character of Horace Merriweather, who has various weapons and items from other horror franchises, like Freddy's glove and Hannibal Lecter's mask. Hell, even a reference to real-life killer Jeffrey Dahmer, which might have been in poor taste. In terms of who won, Stolberg and Florsheim wanted a Clue-like ending where two endings would have been shot with each character winning and then sending the different endings to different theaters, which was considered for Freddy vs. Jason, but it didn't pan out. The only major thing I really didn't like is the alternate third act, where throughout the film, Michael had a higher kill count than Pinhead, so Pinhead goes back in time to Halloween 1978 to steal kills from Michael, which is the dumbest thing imaginable, and for some reason Stolberg preferred this dumbass third act. Obviously, as we know, Akkad wasn't a fan, as he wanted the series to stay as grounded as possible, and having Cenobites in there wouldn't have made sense. As we know, as I stated in my previous video on these movies, eventually each creator stepped into the project in 2003, the year of Freddy vs. Jason. Despite rejecting multiple scripts, Dimension now started to fast-track the project after the success of Freddy vs. Jason. So much so, they wanted to release it in 2004 to capitalize on the idea. They reached out to Carpenter and Barker so the former could direct and the latter could write, as I mentioned previously. Unfortunately, both men didn't like what had become of their works, as we know from Carpenter, as I talked about it previously, but with Barker as well, who hated the concept of sequels to begin with. Despite this, both agreed to be a part of the project. Barker even stated that he would simply do it only if Carpenter wanted to do it, and surprisingly, he did, so they got both for the time being. Even Doug Bradley was open to this idea, despite him not being okay with the concept initially. So, why wasn't this made? Well, as I mentioned in my previous video about it, there were two major factors, one derivative of the other. The first being Mustafa Akkad. I wrongly accused of his sons being against the idea in my previous video because I thought Akkad had died at that point in time when there were still discussions about it. He absolutely hated the idea because he didn't want his precious Michael Myers being with the likes of Pinhead and tried to stop the production however he could. With this, he took to the internet, where he requested a poll on HalloweenMovies.com to gauge what the fans wanted. In less than 2 weeks, 54% of 8,000 fans voted for an astounding no for the crossover. Apparently that was enough, and Dimension outright canceled the project. To rub it in further, at the 25th anniversary convention, he stated that the project was canceled and fans applauded, although they were open to him fighting Jason. So Michael's fight against Pinhead was as dead as a doornail, although there were still consistent rumblings of a crossover, with Robert Englund teasing the idea of Freddy fighting Michael, or even Freddy fighting both Michael and Jason. But this was all just talk, and we will never get this ridiculous, albeit hilariously fun concept on the silver screen. Next is Halloween H25, written by Tim Day in 2003. After the major success of Halloween H2O, a sequel was of course greenlit despite Michael getting an axe to the neck. Even though pretty much everyone preferred the ending that Michael was in fact dead, there was that pesky Mustafa Akkad who still wanted to make more sequels. So it had to be written into the movie that there was some way that Michael could be resurrected. The best way they thought to do this is that somehow Michael strangled an EMS worker to the point it crushed his larynx, which somehow caused his inability to speak, even though that's not how that works. He then switched places with him, and Laurie killed an innocent man, which caused her to go insane and get institutionalized. Larry Brand eventually was hired to write the H2O sequel. Brand's idea surrounding the college students getting attacked by Michael during a live webcast was based around the idea of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast, with the inability to discern reality from fiction. However, this idea would be twisted and fucked up thanks to studio meddling, and we got the incredibly awful and ungodly stupid Halloween Resurrection. I have not seen it, but I know the stupidity of it by proxy. Resurrection was a complete and utter failure from critics, audiences, fans, and box office alike. It was a complete dumpster fire, so there wouldn't exactly be a rush to get a Halloween 9 into production. Dimension was also kind of in a shit state in 2002. The 3 horror movies they released that year, including Halloween Resurrection, all bombed and were critical failures. Dimension was in a pickle and they needed a hit. All their other horror franchises were direct-to-video outside of Scream, and they had no plans to release another one after Scream 3. So Dimension wanted to pump out another Halloween film the next year in the hopes of getting a film that will fare better at the box office and Weinstein can get his quick buck. Enter Tim Day. He was a co-writer on the film Hellraiser Hellseeker, which also came out in 2002 but was direct-to-video, and was hired to write what was dubbed Halloween H25, which would be a challenge since you can only release it that one year, and it was already late 2002. The only stipulation from Weinstein was that Busta Rhymes' character Freddie Harris had to be in the movie due to being under contract at Dimension. He submitted the treatment on December 5th, 2002, and that is as far as it got. Halloween H25 picks up where Resurrection left off inside a darkened Haddonfield morgue. A badly burned shape rises from the slab to attack an attending worker. Her screams attract a nearby police officer who fires on the slasher multiple times. Suddenly, a director yells, "Cut, cut, cut." In actuality, this is not a continuation of Resurrection's ending, but a staged recreation of it for an upcoming documentary on Michael Myers. It's now October 29th, 2003, 1 year after the Dangertainment fiasco at the Myers house. Survivor Freddie Harris has spent the past year self-financing and producing the documentary in hopes of bringing closure to Michael's victims and their families. Its gala premiere is set for Halloween night in Haddonfield with an audience comprised of victims, their families, nurses, doctors, and police. All proceeds are being directed toward the Haddonfield Victims Fund. As part of his documentary, Freddie interviews Tracy Woods, a forensic psychologist with the FBI's serial killer unit. Agent Woods assures Freddie that Michael truly died last year, having actually risen from the morgue slab and been fired upon by multiple police. She then produces an urn containing his supposed ashes. "I was there when they put him in the oven. He's gone, Freddie. End of story." In actuality, Michael is still very much alive and being kept in a secret underground research facility outside of Chicago. Woods is well aware of this, having spent the past year studying him in great detail. Her goal has been to find what triggers Michael to kill. He's shown photos of his family, his victims, and even childhood toys, though the slasher's heart rate never changes. It does spike, however, upon being shown a Myers family heirloom, a music box that plays a cheerier version of the familiar Halloween theme. The following day, the Shape manages a bloody escape from the FBI's underground facility. Upon exiting his cell, he notices a television playing a news story about Freddy's documentary premiere. He stops by Agent Woods' office on his way out, stealing an invite list for the premiere tomorrow night. This guest list contains names and addresses for countless faces from throughout Halloween history. Everyone from Tommy Doyle and Sheriff Brackett to John Tate and Sarah Moyer. The Shape travels to Haddonfield and begins visiting the addresses on the list. He first murders several now elderly ex-staff members from his time at Smith's Grove Sanitarium. Agent Woods follows after and uncovers a trail of bodies which local authorities suspect her of committing. Once arrested, she tries unsuccessfully to convince them of her role at the FBI. Unfortunately, her boss has disavowed knowledge of her employment as payback for Michael's escape. FBI Chief: Michael Myers is dead, and I never heard of Tracy Woods. Having acquired a new mask, the Shape visits Agent Woods at Haddonfield PD. He doesn't kill her, though. He instead decapitates the on-duty officer and tosses the poor man's head into her cell as a threatening gesture. As night falls on Haddonfield, the premiere event begins inside the town's tiny one-screen movie theater. Unbeknownst to the audience of survivors within, their worst fear is now lurking just backstage. The Shape first encounters Tommy Doyle in the men's room, who he swiftly murders. As the documentary plays, Freddie notices the Shape hiding at stage left. Believing him to be a stagehand with a poor sense of humor, he goes to confront him. He instead finds Sarah Moyer, who thanks him for the sense of closure his documentary has brought her. Meanwhile, a Halloween conspiracy theorist springs Agent Woods from jail, and they rush to the premiere to alert Freddie. They search the packed theater for the escaped slasher, but instead find Sarah murdered. Freddie rushes on stage to warn attendees that Michaels has returned, but the Shape slashes through the screen and attacks him. The panicked crowd tries to leave, but find the exit doors locked. Freddy engages his nemesis in a fight to the death. He finally gains the upper hand when Agent Woods distracts the shape using the music box. The Dangertainment founder uses this opportunity to fatally impale the shape with a piece of an old set. How's that for closure? This isn't innately terrible, considering its predecessor. I respect the fact that they try to make Freddy a three-dimensional character, which is a far cry from his appearance in the previous film.
Trick or treat, motherfucker!
To the point, it might be out of character. However, this was only a treatment, and it's entirely possible that he could have been fleshed out properly if this actually became a script. Plus, grief and PTSD are handled differently from person to person, so they could have made it work. Especially when it's teased that Freddy might be seeing the shape not because he's there, but because it's a side effect of his PTSD, as well as him actually caring about the victims and making this documentary out of pocket and donating whatever money it makes to a victims fund. The FBI subplot is pretty good. It wouldn't have been as good as Two Faces of Evil, but I like the idea of the FBI hunting Michael and him being in this technological wonder of maximum security. Agent Woods is an interesting character that wouldn't have fit the mold of the final girl, but it would have been at least unique. Not a fan of Tommy immediately dying while taking a piss, though. The meta-commentary would have been an interesting angle to take, but considering that Scream's thing, and this would have been about 3 years after Scream 3, it might be seen as repetitive, but who knows. Other things not mentioned is that it would have reestablished the Thorn trilogy into this continuity, which is kind of dumb because it has the majorly fucked up idea of Laurie just leaving her daughter and that daughter getting killed. It's just really fucked up in Laurie's case. Then you have the music box playing the actual Halloween theme, so now it exists in universe somehow, as well as John Carpenter himself, who apparently would have made a cameo if this thing happened, if he actually agreed to it, that is. Others shown, including some previously mentioned, both sheriffs in Brackett and Meeker, Tommy Doyle, John Tate, Miles Barton, and Sarah Moyer, with even more at the premiere, even including Jimmy the EMT from Halloween 2. This treatment also would have confirmed the popular fan theory that Jimmy is Jamie's father, which could be interesting but also open up some major questions and plot holes. So why wasn't this made? It's not really all that known. When Day submitted his treatment, it received positive reception from Weinstein, even though it needed some more development, mainly reconfiguring the documentary element to distance itself from screen, even Weinstein recommending it be a book instead of a documentary. However, Day's deal with Dimension had come to a close, also writing a Children of the Corn sequel that never got made. So he left the project, but his treatment remained in development limbo pretty much, never getting made, but being some sort of influence on future projects. With Day leaving and trying to make a sequel in only 10 months was an impossible feat, even one that Weinstein couldn't bear the thought of. So it was laid to rest, but the reason specifically will forever remain unknown. Only speculation. Next is Halloween Family Reunion, which would have been a working title by an unknown writer from 2003 to 2005. This film would have been a sequel to Halloween Resurrection, and it would have tried to connect the Jamie saga, also known as the Thorn saga, to the H2O saga, similar to the early drafts of H2O. It has mention of not only Laurie, who just died in the previous film, but Jamie and the Man in Black as well, who both died in Halloween 6. The only story bits that are known is that John Tate would have died from mysterious circumstances and Dr. Loomis's son would have been hunting Michael Myers. The main reason this was cancelled was due to the unfortunate death of Mustafa Akkad in 2005. Next is Halloween 9, Retribution, written by Duddy Appleton and Jim Keeble in 2004. With H.2.5 essentially dead and buried, Weinstein and Dimension, however, were tickled by the idea of survivors coming back and could possibly bring in more fans back to the franchise. The first name that was hired to write something along these lines was Joe Harris, who just wrote his first film, Darkness Falls. He signed a deal and pitched some ideas to Dimension, but nothing ever came from his time on the Halloween sequel. Although he did recommend that Busta Rhymes and LL Cool J join forces to stop Michael, because why not? Halloween H.2.5 became a likely title for the next film less and less as the days went on, so Dimension settled on a new title, fitting with the last film's type of title, with Halloween Retribution. However, the actual script reads Halloween 9 Retribution, so that's what I'm calling it here. This entry was described as the definitive chapter of the franchise by Dimension, and that by May 2003, Mustafa Akkad chose a storyline and was getting someone to write the script. It was set for a summer 2004 release date. Again, why you release a Halloween movie in summer doesn't make sense to me. But this was sidelined thanks to Freddy vs. Jason, and the discussions of Michael vs. Pinhead arose, but were soon snuffed out thanks to Akkad. Then it got further delayed by the planning and execution of the Halloween Returns to Haddonfield convention during Halloween 2003. During this 3-day event, discussions were abound about Halloween 9, fronted by Mustafa Akkad and his son Malik. Many fans wanted to see Dick Warlock and Danielle Harris return, but the most excitement came from Charles Cyphers returning as Sheriff Brackett, and the idea was all but cemented for Halloween 9. Dimension execs loved the idea too because it worked for their returning survivors idea. Alan B. McElroy was considered to write the film, but he declined. However, they eventually hired British talent Duddy Appleton and Jim Keeble, mostly known for indie films, with their most popular being the indie comedy The Most Fertile Man in Ireland. So they were a strange choice to say the least. But their work was diverse, which possibly caught the eye of Akkad. It really is unknown how they came to write the film. Their first draft would be dated February 20th, 2004. Halloween Retribution opens on October 31st, 1964, exactly 1 year after young Michael Myers brutally murdered his older sister on Halloween night. Now catatonic, 7-year-old Michael is an extended stay resident of Smith's Grove Sanitarium. His caregivers are unable to agree on how to best help him or whether he can even be helped. The optimistic Dr. Hill provides Michael with art supplies and encourages him to draw whatever comes to mind. He raises the writing utensil high in the air before stabbing it into his own hand with tremendous force. As orderlies rush to subdue the child, we see that he has covertly stolen something, Dr. Hill's glasses. We then jump ahead 15 years to the evening of October 30th, 1978. A retiring and less optimistic Dr. Hill bids Michael farewell while also taunting him. "You're never going to leave here. This is your home. This is where you will die." Having fashioned a shiv from the glasses years before, Michael fatally stabs Dr. Hill. Maneuvering out of his straitjacket with alarming ease, he lifts a grate in the floor and slips inside. Now free from his confines, the shape moves towards freedom. This opening ends with a familiar station wagon pulling up to the hospital gates to find numerous escaped patients wandering the grounds. The story then shifts 25 years later, 1 year after the events of Halloween Resurrection. Dangertainment founder Freddie Harris is now on tour in promotion of his new book, Unmasking the Monster, an exaggerated chronicle of how he managed to kill Michael Myers, quote-unquote. At one book signing, he encounters a young man who questions whether he really slayed the slasher. This man turns out to be John Tate, son of the deceased Laurie Strode and nephew of the boogeyman himself. After the signing, the Shape murders Freddy, with John arriving just a moment too late to intervene. Hoping to avenge his mother's death and also learn about his newly discovered past, John travels to where it all began, Haddonfield, Illinois. The town has once again banned Halloween and enacted a 6 p.m. curfew for all residents. Strangely, this October 31st finds central Illinois forecast to receive a blanketing of snow. Between the inclement weather and the ban, Halloween is assuredly canceled this year. But several Haddonfield High students have found a way around that by sneaking off to a party cabin in the woods over in Warren County. This group includes your typical high school stereotypes, along with Leah, a shy senior markedly more mature than her peers. The teenagers' van breaks down en route to the cabin, stranding them amid heavy snowfall. They seek shelter at a nearby structure, the long-abandoned ruins of Smith's Grove Sanitarium. Little do Leah and her friends know that they're already being stalked by the Shape, who's returned to his former institutional home. Having murdered the sanitarium's caretaker, he follows close behind as the teens explore the shuttered facility. John arrives in Haddonfield and immediately visits the burned-out lot where the Myers house once stood. It's here he encounters the new central lawman, Sheriff Shaw. John then visits the local library to research his infamous uncle, but is unable to turn up a single public record. It's here a voice calls out to him from behind. "You won't find anything here. They've deleted all that stuff." He turns to see the town's former sheriff, Lee Brackett, who charges that Michael is still alive and killing. Research reveals that an alarming number of Smith's Grove ex-employees have been turning up dead. Concluding that the shape must have returned to the abandoned hospital, John begs police to investigate. They refuse, however, on account of the treacherously icy roads. Police also mention the stranded teenagers at Smith's Grove, whom they plan to rescue in the morning once conditions improve. Unwilling to wait, John alerts Brackett of his plan to rescue the teens and heads for Smith's Grove alone. Hoping to join the fight, Brackett steals Sheriff Shaw's police cruiser before speeding off toward the abandoned hospital. The shape picks off the teenagers at shuttered Smith's Grove one by one, until only Leah and Noah remain. Having barely escaped their encounter with the slasher, they take refuge in the old medical records vault. It's here the teens learn about their attacker's history through old therapy notes and video recordings. The shape forces his way inside, though he's momentarily stalled when Leah impersonates his older sister Judith. With John and Brackett's arrival, a bloody battle unfolds through the hospital. This spills out into the snow and onto a frozen lake. John buries an axe into Michael's chest, who collapses into the thin ice, which soon breaks. The shape pulls John down into the frigid water with him, but Leah, Noah, and Brackett manage to pull him out. The seemingly dead slasher sinks into the dark abyss. As the heroes drag John to safety, they notice he's holding on to something tightly, the pale white mask of Michael Myers, into which he stares intensely. I would definitely say this is another favorite of mine, mainly due to the setting and how that comes to be. It's not uncommon for Illinois to have snowstorms in October, so having that be the basis for what happens to the people involved was genius. It's so simple, but a weather change-up could throw people for a loop, like the ending of the Friday the 13th 3D script by Nick Antosca, which teased the same thing. It has some stuff in regards to Michael's backstory I'm not the biggest fan of, but it's not too much, so I think it could work and doesn't disrupt anything in terms of timeline or lore majorly. I like Brackett in this story, but it does bring up a bit of a strange story thread. Why didn't this happen sooner? Brackett was sitting on his ass for years with a Michael that was still out there since he murdered Marion in the beginning of H2O. So why now? Nothing in the script really states anything that defines this, so I guess he was just too depressed to do anything. Freddy's character makes more sense here because I feel like without the original ending of Resurrection, which did have Freddy apologizing to Sarah, Freddy would remain the douchey showman he always was, and his death would have assuredly gotten applause from the audience. You have a lot to unpack in regards to characterization that makes this a step above yet another generic Halloween film. You have the stuff with John, Brackett, and the final girl in Leah all wanting retribution, even Michael with how he was treated at Smith's Grove. I wouldn't say it makes him sympathetic, but there is an intriguing bit in terms of a characterization with Michael, and I'll take it over him being a pawn in a fucking cult. It seemed as though they were teasing that John would become the new shape, which could have been an interesting aspect in a sequel, but they'd probably just do what they did in Friday the 13th Part 6 and just retcon it. I like the idea of it kind of being a bottle movie with everything taking place in the creepy and abandoned Smith's Grove. The teens would have been stock stereotypes, which I'm sure would have been eye-rolling, but in terms of Leah's brother Noah, who is mute, could have been an interesting addition and bring a whole new layer of suspense and tension into the movie. Leah seems like a decent character, but might be a little too Laurie Strode for my taste. I like Brackett's arc, even if it includes yet another sheriff's daughter getting killed, which brings Brackett back to that night. It did state he did obsess over Michael, but unsure why he didn't go after him before, but it's implied that he simply was too elusive for Brackett to follow. So again, that might be another good reason as to why this didn't happen before. I also like how more of a well-rounded character John is rather than generic teenage boy. Loomis has a cameo in the film through some footage of his therapy sessions with Michael, which could have been great to see. So, with all that though, why wasn't this made? Simply put, it's once again unknown. This wasn't publicly known until many years later. It was liked by both Dimension and Trancas because it got to a script. Although, at some point, Appleton and Keeble were replaced with Jake Wade Wall, who would write his own Retribution, but nothing is really known about it, except that it was dated May of 2004 and would have featured John, Brackett, and Freddy, just like this version. But that's not the last time you'll hear Wall's name in this video. Since Hartnett became a star with some later films, it seemed as though his appearance in this franchise would relegate only to H2O, and Trancas and Dimension kept searching for their next film in the franchise. Next is Halloween Haddonfield / Halloween Asylum, written by John Sullivan in 2004. Ever since Dimension had been acquiring bargain bin franchises like Children of the Corn, The Prophecy, Dracula 2000, they had been trying their best to minimize costs, as these were just going to be direct-to-video, with their biggest tactic being shooting films back-to-back. Since Dimension was unsure where to take this franchise, they decided to use this tactic for the Halloween franchise, shooting their 9th and 10th installments back-to-back, hence why I'm mentioning 2 films. Enter John Sullivan. He came into Dimension the previous year to pitch entries for 3 franchises, Mimic, Rambo, and Total Recall, and while they passed on his pitches, they gave him The Prophecy to write back-to-back sequels for, and he just sent them 2 of his screenplays that could be used for The Prophecy, and Dimension bought them with him making the necessary rewrites. These films would become Uprising and Forsaken. Then after that, Dimension offered him Halloween, which Sullivan was ecstatic about, as he adored horror movies, and especially the Halloween franchise. And while it was never confirmed, Sullivan stated that what he grasped from these meetings is that he would be writing direct-to-video Halloween films, much like the original idea for Halloween 7. This was mainly done so that a viewer wouldn't have to know the long and convoluted timelines associated with the franchise, and can just pick up and rent or buy without seeing any of the other movies. They never went beyond a treatment phase. The first treatment has many names. It was initially called Haddonfield, then was changed to The Legend of Michael Myers, and went back to the working title for the 9th film, Retribution. So here is the story for whatever the fuck this movie would have been called. John Sullivan's first treatment introduces a new protagonist in Dr. Jason Loomis, the now adult son of the late Sam Loomis. A psychiatrist, just like his father, Jason has recently authored a best-selling book on his father's exploits with his most famous patient. In the days leading up to Halloween, Jason learns that Haddonfield has chosen to embrace its bloody past in a most macabre way. This year, the town has planned an entire Halloween festival celebrating the legend of Michael Myers. In a bold move, such revelry will even include a reenactment of the murders. The younger Loomis feels this is not only distasteful, but also extremely dangerous, as some believe the shape to still be at large. He decides to personally visit Haddonfield to argue against holding this event. Jason arrives in town just before Halloween and begins tracking down the mayor, the police chief, and city council members. He charges that such an event is a slap in the face to the countless families who've lost loved ones over the years. However, the town officials prove unsympathetic, citing the massive economic downturn Haddonfield has suffered as of late. Investment in the area has ground to a halt, which has sent unemployment soaring. Meanwhile, curious tourists have continued to pass through in pilgrimage to the birthplace of ultimate evil. Rather than scoff at these visitors, Haddonfield has finally chosen to embrace them and its own past. The event itself has already created numerous jobs, and the mass of tourists expected will have plenty of opportunities to spend cash within city limits. Unbeknownst to anyone, the shape is still alive, having spent the last several years living off the grid on the outskirts of town. Waiting for opportunity to strike again, which the festival more than provides, he returns to Haddonfield on Halloween morning just as preparations are underway. With multiple people brandishing knives and white masks, the shape blends in more easily than ever before. He first stalks and murders several of the town elders who are responsible for planning the event. As the night kicks off, local actors recreate the murder of Judith Myers before an audience. The shape observes this bizarre restaging and fixates on the young girl performing the role of his sister. Meanwhile, Jason Loomis has begun to notice the suspicious disappearance of several local leaders and worries that Michael may have returned to take revenge. He takes his concerns to the sheriff, a younger lawman new to Haddonfield, who agrees that Michael may indeed be back. Unfortunately, the celebratory chaos of the festival makes it impossible to tell if the real Michael is present, or even if actual murders are being committed. With so many reenactments, the night would be filled with screams and the streets littered with fake blood. The festival eventually builds towards the night's main attraction, a big dance at Haddonfield High School with multiple live music acts. Jason and the sheriff, both in attendance, somehow confirm that the shape is back and that he's now targeting the actress playing his sister. Police interrupt the dance and lock down the high school in an effort to protect the teens, but the slasher is already inside. A fire soon breaks out, forcing everyone out in the open. This final act culminates in a three-way fight between Jason, Fake Judith, and the Shape inside the burning school gymnasium. Their struggle unfolds before a gigantic papier-mâché pumpkin, which is also on fire. This pumpkin was to resemble the one from Halloween's opening credits. The Judith actress eventually gains the upper hand and stabs the Shape multiple times, presumably to death. Now, before I get into my thoughts, time to read through Halloween Asylum, which thankfully only had one title. However, it's only a rough outline and not a full treatment. His follow-up would have found Jason Loomis continuing in his father's footsteps by enlisting as the new head administrator of Smith's Grove Sanitarium. Per the screenwriter, Jason would have been compelled to join the staff of Smith's Grove following the incident in Haddonfield. While the still missing Michael Myers was presumed dead in that sequel's ending, the younger Loomis is concerned that another young slasher might pass through Smith's Grove and emerge or escape unrehabilitated. But this isn't exactly his father's sanitarium. Following the 1978 breakout, authorities have continuously upgraded Smith's Grove so that it functions like a high-tech prison. Patient rooms have been converted into cells with electronic locking mechanisms. In fact, the security of the entire facility is now managed by computer software. This new system has drastically scaled back the need for guards and orderlies, resulting in a minimal skeleton crew overseeing things. Unfolding mostly on Halloween night, this asylum finds Jason Loomis, a young female reporter, 2 orderlies, and a security guard as the only non-patients in the hospital. A raging thunderstorm causes a short circuit in the power grid, which results in a dangerous situation. The resulting blackout throws the facility into lockdown mode while simultaneously releasing patients from their cells. This traps the aforementioned staff and reporter within the facility with a roaming horde of incredibly dangerous patients. How does the Shape factor into this? Well, he doesn't. Not really. Yet there is a delusional patient named Richard Raines, however, who actually believes himself to be the real Michael Myers. As the evening begins, Richard seems like any other raving patient, but as the night rages on, he slowly disappears into his fabricated identity as the Shape. Richard grows increasingly withdrawn until becoming entirely nonverbal. He also fashions a crude white mask that he stitches together from old bed sheets. Upon either obtaining or making a weapon, he begins stalking the lockdown Smith's Grove and picking off our heroes one by one. To make matters worse, Richard isn't the only homicidal maniac running loose this evening. He just so happens to be the only one impersonating the Shape. Trying to survive the night, Jason and the others attempt to reach the only traversable exit in the entire building. This path takes them through the hospital's long-abandoned basement, which was once the site of ghastly medical experimentation. They move quickly through this hall of horrors, their most dangerous clientele trails close behind. Richard eventually picks off the remaining staff until only Jason and the female reporter remain. Having cornered his prey in the basement, the faux Shape now moves in for the kill. It's here that Jason plays into Richard's delusion by making a desperate plea as though this were a conversation between Sam Loomis and the actual Shape. "I always tried to help you, Michael." With this, Richard steps back silently as if he's going to spare them. But he doesn't. After a pause, he raises his knife to strike, but is instead fatally stabbed from behind by the actual Shape. Having heard the speech, the real Michael allows Jason and the reporter to escape through the basement exit before disappearing into the night himself. Yeah, these were not really all that great. I like the idea, kinda, of Sam's totally unheard of son taking over his role with warning people against Michael. Haddonfield/Legend/Retribution was not really all that great. The idea that it was based around a reenactment of the original murders is just dumb, and now they have Judith, in a way, getting her revenge against Michael from beyond the grave. Yeah, sure, okay. I feel like some good ideas are there, like the commentary on serial killer worship, but I'm sure it would have been lost, like Larry Brand's commentary on life imitating art in Resurrection. In terms of Asylum, it's definitely better, even though it does kind of rip off the idea of someone else being the killer, like in Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, and we all know how much ass that thing sucked. It's still at least kinda unique. It probably would have been executed poorly, but hey, a man can dream. As I said before, I like the idea of it taking place entirely in one location, and the idea of using Smith's Grove being this high-tech prison is a really fucking cool idea. So I'll take Asylum over Haddonfield, but both are not exactly amazing by any means. So why weren't these made? Well, at this point, Halloween wasn't a high priority for Dimension and only created these ideas as sort of a last resort if they couldn't figure out any sequels, whenever that may be. It's unknown Akkad's thoughts on these ideas, but it's assumed he would have said no, considering he didn't want his beloved franchise to go direct to video. But Dimension and Trancas did like the idea of the entire movie taking place in Smith's Grove, much like Retribution before it. Next is an entirely different Halloween Asylum written by Matt Venn in 2005. Halloween Retribution was pretty much dead at this point, both the Appleton and Keeble draft, and Sullivan's first treatment, which was retroactively called Retribution. Dimension exec Nick Phillips looked high and low for promising talent to write some sort of Halloween sequel. Matt Venn, a promising young talent, eventually caught his eye. Venn, like others before him, pitched the idea of a Halloween movie taking place entirely in Smith's Grove. Trancas and Dimension liked the pitch and had him flesh it out into a script. Venn's version brought together two things that the companies were hoping for: a movie set entirely in Smith's Grove and returning survivors. Because of this is the second film to bear the title Halloween Asylum, although the scripts are entirely different. Buzz for the film already started to grow even before Venn submitted his draft, with Fangoria leaking the idea and who would appear. The script is dated January 28th, 2005, about 2 weeks after the leak. Halloween 2005 finds the charred Shape right where we left him, undeniably dead on a morgue slab, yet it's soon revealed that this is not the infamous slasher, but Haddonfield University student Jim Morgan. A flashback to Resurrection's ending depicts the Shape escaping the burning garage, but not before putting Freddy's discarded white mask on Jim's corpse. The alarmed coroner gravely proclaims, "Michael Myers is still out there." Elsewhere, the Shape has tracked Freddy to his motel room and fatally stabs him. Defiant to the end, Freddy spits a glob of blood into Michael's white mask. Fuck you. The Shape spins around to see a cavalry of officers armed with taser guns. They fire, lighting him up like the 4th of July during an electrical storm. The Shape crumples to the ground as the officers celebrate. "I can't believe it! I can't believe we've caught Michael Myers!" The title sequence plays over a montage of Michael's trial. The story then jumps ahead 2 years to the evening of October 30th, 2004. We meet a young 20-something nurse named Lucy Garrity as she heads into her night shift at Smith's Grove State Penitentiary. Formerly a sanitarium, Smith's Grove now houses the state's most criminally insane citizens, whom Lucy rightly fears. The night will mark a momentous occasion. Famed killer Michael Myers is scheduled to be executed for his crimes just after midnight. For the past 2 years, the Shape has been confined to a maximum security cell and forced to wear a white leather restraint mask, which is eerily similar to his killing mask. The head administrator, Dr. Phineas Crane, has invited a salacious documentary crew to capture Michael's execution for posterity. Just before midnight, the facility receives a surprise visit from Lee Brackett, the former sheriff of Haddonfield. He begs for an opportunity to face his daughter's killer, which Crane reluctantly allows. Brackett grows hysterical and attempts to kill Michael himself with a firearm he snuck inside. He's quickly taken down by armed guards in a huge scuffle, however, and placed in solitary confinement until after the execution. Michael's eventual death by electric chair is a grisly spectacle carried out at full power, moderation be damned. It's so intense that his head bursts into flames as his body spasms. Unbeknownst to anyone, this was not actually Michael Myers, but a helpless guard. In the chaos of Brackett's assassination attempt, the restrained Shape managed to palm a small piece of metal, which he used to escape his handcuffs. He was then left alone with a single guard as his colleagues escorted Brackett to solitary. It was here the Shape attacked the lone watchman, swapped outfits, and ripped out his tongue to prevent him from speaking, which definitely makes a lot more sense than a crushed larynx. As Dr. Crane celebrates Michael's apparent demise, the actual Michael roams the facility dressed as a guard, face shield and all. He immediately sets free a ward of inmates. Noticing their escape, Crane activates a high-tech lockdown, which mechanically seals all doors and windows shut. Suspicious over this turn of events, he goes to inspect Michael's corpse in the morgue. Peering beneath the leather restraint mask, he finds the poor detoned guard from earlier. Dr. Crane now realizes he's locked down the entire prison with an escaped Michael Myers stalking its halls. The Shape works quickly to unleash a reign of terror upon Smith's Grove. He first murders Brackett in solitary confinement before freeing the remaining inmates. The slasher then sets a clever trap for the guards, locking them inside with the hospital's giant industrial freezer. With no one to stop him, he begins to indiscriminately slicing through patients, staff, and documentary crew members alike. Teaming with a patient and one of the crew, Lucy tries hiding out in the old medical records archive. She's followed by the Shape, however, who kills both men. A fierce battle unfolds, the end of which finds Lucy cornered and unarmed. In a desperate move, she presses play on an old audio cassette deck. This blasts audio of a decades-old therapy session between Dr. Loomis and 6-year-old Michael. Hearing his own adolescent voice stuns the Shape long enough for Lucy to escape, though he soon catches up to her. Lucy is ultimately saved by Dr. Crane, who fires upon a badly wounded Michael with his pistol, seemingly killing him. Having nulled the threat, Dr. Crane removes Smith's Grove from lockdown. Lucy emerges from the facility and heads home. It's now mid-afternoon on October 31st. There is a problem, however, in that authorities are unable to locate the Shape's body within the hospital. They instead find a trail of blood leading from medical archives to employee records, with Lucy's folder missing. Concurrent with this, Lucy discovers her roommate and boyfriend murdered in her upstairs bedroom. The Shape attacks and another fight ensues. Lucy is again saved at the last moment by Dr. Crane, who crashes his car into her living room in order to thwart the attack. He exits his vehicle unharmed, but is unable to find the slasher in the wreckage. Lucy and Crane look out as trick-or-treaters take to the streets. Halloween night has begun, with Michael Myers once again loose in Haddonfield. God help them, Crane says. God help us all, Lucy retorts. This is definitely a vast improvement over the back-to-back treatments previously. I think it would have certainly been intriguing to have a Halloween movie that is essentially a prison movie with Smith's Grove turning into a maximum security penitentiary. Such a cool fucking idea. Freddy's death is also described very well. He goes out immediately in a relatively creepy sequence before he really has any time to develop or regress. He still goes out like a badass in the film. The cast of characters are certainly more memorable and not the same stock characters, which I really like. The character of Dr. Crane is reminiscent of Loomis, but still different enough. Same with Lucy being reminiscent of Laurie. I'm not a huge fan of the whole switcheroo crap with Michael and someone else, and he escapes once again. It's just kind of dumb, but you have to have him not be burnt to a crisp in the next movie because he's not Jason. As well as Brackett essentially coming in and just dying. Freddy I'm okay with because he sucks, but having Brackett just die seems disingenuous, especially only after a couple minutes of screen time. With half of that time, he's a raving lunatic or locked up. Far cry from what Retribution tried to do. I also like, weirdly, how this doesn't feel like a Halloween movie, but it is a unique spin on the franchise and you still feel it in its roots. It's a Michael Myers movie more so than a Halloween movie, and I appreciate that. He's more like he is in the original film. There is more than just a diet Jason Voorhees, which is what he felt like in many installments. Asylum doesn't do anything that is really a far cry of what this franchise has done. I mean, cults and found footage and psychic connections and all that shit have been a part of this franchise. This one cuts out the bullshit, makes a simple cut and dry movie but with a unique spin, which is what the best canceled Halloween movies are, as I described one of my favorite canceled films, Halloween 7, this way as well. As that movie also had a run-of-the-mill slasher with a different genre mixed in. But the difference here is that the slasher part is still fun to read, while Halloween 7 was a bit generic in its approach. So why wasn't this made? The undisputed terror of development hell. Despite positive feedback, the communication went cold, especially when Ven's involvement was never confirmed by either company. It also didn't help that this was submitted during a really shit time for Dimension, but mainly with Miramax. The Weinsteins did not like working under the House of Mouse, which owned Miramax. A lot of complicated bits in regards to that, but I'll keep it brief. It pretty much involves the egos of both the Weinsteins and Michael Eisner, as well as rampant spending on Miramax's part, so Weinsteins wanted out. Disney wanted to keep Dimension because they were clocking in profitable productions, but Bob wanted to stand by his brother, mainly because he would be losing money if he stayed with Disney. So eventually, on the final day of March 2005, the Weinsteins would be announcing that they were splitting from Disney to form the Weinstein Company, 2 months after Van submitted his draft. Because of this, dimensions of investment in Halloween was up in the air, and Van and his script were caught in the middle. So Halloween 9 was the least of anyone's worries. Next is Halloween 3000, written by an unknown writer in 2005 to 2006. Very little is known about the behind the scenes of this. I assume it was being shopped around either right before or maybe even after the mess with Disney. In the time after Asylum was off the table, Trancas was looking at various pitches for the next Halloween movie, and I'm going to assume that this one was one of them, and it somehow got fleshed out into a script. The film opens with a flashback to the first film. Tommy and Lindsay are going to the Mackenzies, and Tommy claims it was the boogeyman. 22 years later, in 2000, a kid named Jimmy Moyer keeps having headaches and is uttering the words Samhain and Michael Myers over and over again while walking home. Kids start bullying him, and he threatens them with a hunting knife. Cut to his POV walking into his house. He kills his mother, and it's implied he kills his dog as well. 6 years later, he is contained in Smith's Grove. Lindsay is now a criminal psychiatrist trying to keep him locked up, but board members who want to throw him in prison don't heed to her warnings. Michael Myers permanently died in the fire in Halloween 2, but somehow Loomis lived. And she claims that Samhain possessed Michael and now possesses Jimmy. But board members stick to their guns and he'll be sent to prison. She goes to Jimmy's cell and drops the original Halloween mask and claims she knows what he really is. 4 days later, Lindsay is talking with Dr. Wynn about Jimmy. She thinks he'll escape, but Wynn doesn't believe her. She then talks with one of her patients who is scared of Jimmy. 2 days later, a deputy and a corrections officer are driving to Smith's Grove to take Jimmy to prison. There is then a scene with the patients on the lawn that mimics the original film. We see the shape. In Jimmy's room, it says brother, scrawled in blood with a dead guard hanging next to it with his keys missing. An orderly lets Lindsay know he escaped, and the police truck comes to the sanitarium, and the corrections officer gets out and tries to get in. 3 figures jump onto the truck, and 2 vanish. Lindsay and the orderly find Wynn dead. Patients kill the deputy and the corrections officer trying to get into Smith's Grove. The driver calls for help, but the shape kills him. Additionally, he runs over 3 patients. Lindsay and the orderly come out and see the dead officers and sees the truck driving away. She smiles, knowing she was right about him. Now we cut to a girl named Lisa who is filming a documentary on Haddonfield and talks about the Myers house and its history. The shape sees her, and he has the OG mask on. The Wallace house has been converted into a free clinic, and the Doyle's house just looks older. She tries to talk about that night with Tommy, but he yells at her and slams the door in her face, clearly still traumatized from that night. While walking, her 2 friends scare her, Nina, who is still in high school, and Lexi, who has since graduated. They plan to do something on Halloween despite it being banned. The shape is still watching her while outside the Moyer house. Back to the sanitarium. Lindsay is claiming it's Jimmy to the sheriff. Cut to the shape driving a Civic. He goes into an elementary school and walks in like he owns the place. Lindsay and the police find the truck flipped over on its side on a dirt road. Before she can look inside, she backs away inside her car while the police stare at her. We never find out what's inside. Lisa is in class. She sees the shape behind Lexi on the street and tells her to run, but he disappears. The whole class and Lexi start laughing. She does her project on Haddonfield, and her teacher tells her to stop and eventually fails her. While outside, another classmate named Manfredi, I swear to God that's his name, scares Lisa. Silver Shamrock is referenced. In Lexi's car, they are contemplating what to do for Halloween. Lisa wants to go to the cemetery now for her documentary. It's also in this scene that it's revealed there is a cult of Michael Myers. They drop off Nina and Manfredi, and they see the shape but think they're part of the cult. Cut back to Lindsay, who goes to police headquarters and asks for Brackett, and she is taken to him. A TV report on the escape is shown, and a Halloween 3 commercial plays. Brackett is happy to see her, but hates how she's at Smith's Grove and hates Loomis. They talk about Jimmy escaping. Lisa and Lexi talk while driving to the cemetery. Brackett agrees to give Lindsay some men and compares everything to that night 28 years ago. The shape is following the girls. They get to the cemetery and see the tombstones from 1978 and 2000 are missing. They see the drunk caretaker and one of the cult of Michael Myers, and Lexi kicks the ladder in the nuggets. The caretaker comes towards them with a rifle, and they sprint away while Brackett and Lindsay come to the cemetery and see the missing headstones. Brackett gets angry at Annie's missing headstone. Lisa and Lexi leave. Brackett realizes that Jimmy has come back and must stop him. It also turns out that Jimmy's gown from the sanitarium was found with a dead guy. Cut to the police, who find the main hangout of the cult of Myers and sees they're all teens. Lisa and Lexi are in the car and see the shape again. It begins to get dark and kids are trick-or-treating, but stealthily since Halloween is banned. The shape is stalking the streets. Nina and Manfredi talk about their plans for the night, and Nina sees the shape, but Manfredi doesn't. Nina eventually talks with her brother, Willard, about trick-or-treating with his friends so she can go out. Cut back to Brackett and Lindsay, and the deputy states they found the Civic at the school while Brackett and Lindsay are at the Myers house talking about trying to stop him. The shape kills one of the Michael Myers cult. At the school, Samhain is scrawled in blood across a window. The shape almost kills Lexi. Nina and Willard are watching Dawn of the Dead. Lisa arrives and they talk about the plan for Halloween. The cemetery and Moyer are mentioned. Lisa goes across the street to Manfredi's house and the shape is watching her. Brackett and Lindsay go into Lindsay's old house, which is now dilapidated and abandoned. They comb around the house. Cut to Tommy, who has a flashback of that night on Halloween. Lindsay and Brackett come out of her house and don't find anything. Lindsay asks about Tommy and Brackett says he's a basket case. Lisa is at Manfredi's house, and she's a third wheel with Lexi and Manfredi making out. Lexi allegedly wants to get pregnant from Manfredi and is overall acting like a bitch. So Lisa goes back to Nina's and tells her that she saw the shape watching her. Nina gets her brother out of the house, and the shape is watching him. At the Moyer house, Deputy Drucker is keeping watch. Brackett and Lindsay enter, and Brackett states his reason for hating Loomis. Somebody's been in the Moyer house as they find a rabbit in a boiling pot. They eventually find two of the Myers cult on Jimmy's old bed with Annie's tombstone above them. Brackett screams. Deputy says he saw a guy that looked like a Michael Myers head down the street. They run out. They find a Michael Myers in an alley and the police surround him. Brackett is trying to reason with him, but he gets no response. He kills him, and it turns out to be a normal teen. The other officers try to plant evidence on him, but Brackett says no and states he wants to be arrested and does so himself. Lexi and Manfredi are being watched by the shape in the house while they have sex. Nina and Lisa are watching a movie and are having fun. Lisa wants to go to the cursed houses, and Nina says no. Lexi prank calls them, but they don't fall for it. She hangs up, and Lexi and Manfredi start to have sex again, and the shape still watches. They cart the dead bodies out of the Moyer house. Cut back to Police HQ, and Brackett is trying to get himself arrested for his crime. But Lindsay states she needs him and holds off for now. Lexi and Manfredi are still in bed. Manfredi goes to check on his dad and finds his father's dead body and is soon killed by the shape. Lexi goes to call Nina and Lisa, but she is then killed by the shape as well. They think it's an obscene phone call. They then try to call Manfredi's. No answer. Reporters are buzzing around the police headquarters about the murdered kid. Troy Miller's parents, the kid Brackett killed, come up to Brackett about their missing son. Nina and Lisa go to Manfredi's house. No answer. They find the key to the door and head in. Brackett and Lindsay go to the Doyle house for clues. Tommy lets them in. The place looks dilapidated. They then talk about Jimmy, but Tommy is angry with Lindsay about never contacting him. He's ready for anything, though. Nina and Lisa are looking around Manfredi's house and eventually go up to the master bedroom and find the bodies of Manfredi, his father, and Lexi. Nina is killed by the shape. Lisa runs out of the house trying to get help to no avail. She goes to another house for help. The woman inside calls the police. The shape spots Willard going into his house and Lisa tells him to run. She then heads to Nina's house trying to get Willard to open the door. He eventually does so just in time, but the shape vanishes. Lindsay makes the assessment that Jimmy knows he has a brother and that he's out there looking for him. They run into the cult and Brackett shoots one. They run and the cult chases after them. Lisa is on the phone with the police, but they don't believe her. She soon realizes the shape is in the house and she needs to find a weapon. He eventually finds her and they fight. He cuts her and she stabs him. She tries to find Willard. The shape is following her. Lisa finds him and takes him away from the shape and into his room. The shape busts in and Lisa stabs his hand. They escape through a window. Brackett and Lindsay are still being chased by the cult. They are reached by the marshal and Drucker, and the clan disappears. Now there are riots downtown, leaked from Miller's parents, as well as the other bodies showing up. State troopers are on their way. Brackett, Lindsay, Drucker, and the marshal go through the mob in the marshal's car. Downtown and the police HQ are trashed. Lisa and Willard reach them. They head to Nina's house to find the shape. Police are held up by the mob in the station. The protagonists reach the house. They get out while Lisa stays with Willard. They enter the house and see the carnage. Lisa finds another scrawl that reads, "Brother," inside the house. Lisa and Willard get out of the car and they go across the street to meet Brackett and Lindsay. Lindsay protects the kids while Brackett goes into Manfredi's house. The police headquarters is like a fortress, but the mob eventually leaves when the state troopers show up for Jimmy Moyer. Brackett and Marshall are in the house and they see the carnage. Outside, Willard is impatient and Lindsay reveals she's a psychiatrist at Smith's Grove, which gets Lisa angry, accusing her of letting Jimmy out. They have a back and forth about Jimmy. Brackett and Marshall come back and Drucker shows up telling them about the state patrol. The Shape is stalking the streets and the leader of the cult tries to reason with him, but he is soon killed by the Shape. Half of the cult run away. Back to the protagonists. Willard is in shock. They talk about the brother. It turns out Jimmy's father banged another woman and got her pregnant, and she put the child up for adoption. After his wife's death, he killed himself. They go to the mob and Brackett interrogates one of the cult. They get back into the car and search for the Shape. They find him and start shooting him. He goes down, but he isn't dead and soon kills the marshal. They soon start shooting him again. He goes down again and they try to leave, but the marshal has the keys. Brackett tries to get the car to turn over, but he can't, so he tries to radio for help. The Shape punches through the windshield and starts strangling Brackett. Lindsay gets the kids out and slices his arm. He goes down again. They get the keys and it turns over. Brackett shoots some more into the Shape and they drive away. Willard states he was adopted and the Shape kills a cop. Lindsay brings out a folder on Jimmy and notices his father looks exactly like Willard. The Shape disappears from the protagonists and takes a police car. He then kills another deputy. The protagonists meet up with Drucker at the station. Willard's adopted father is there, clearly upset. Lindsay confronts his father about him being adopted and it's now confirmed Willard is a Moyer. No fucking shit. Brackett wants revenge and handcuffs the father to a desk. They leave. While patrolling, state troopers find the cult walking down the street and despite surrendering, they all get killed. The Shape kills a couple having sex in a car. Lisa is sent to the hospital and Lindsay, Brackett, and Willard are in the car and they head to the school. Willard is unfazed by the death surrounding him and is acting kind of creepy. They find the Shape in the school and unload into him. He goes down. Brackett handcuffs the Shape and puts a bullet in the back of his head. He hands the mask to Lindsay and then he kills himself. The Shape soon gets up and Lindsay starts shooting at him. She tries to reason with him but can't. Willard goes to Jimmy and they hug. Lindsay leaves and the Shape goes after her. Stabs her in the ankle by throwing his knife. When about to go in for the kill, Tommy shows up with a homemade rocket launcher. He shoots the Shape and he explodes. Lindsay then kisses Tommy. 1 year later, and Haddonfield is a ghost town, and Lisa, during voiceover, states she released her documentary. She talks about her trauma and Haddonfield. A slightly older Willard, who is described as a teenager for some reason, is in Smith's Grove and pulls the Shape's mask. I gotta say, this one isn't too bad. My main issues I have with it are two main reasons. The script is really poorly written, and the story is literally just a remake of the original, which I have dubbed a C-make. What do I mean by this? Well, you know how a requel essentially acts as a reboot of the franchise, but is also only a sequel to the original? This acts as a sequel to the first two films, but is essentially a remake. Now, unfortunately, the writer is unknown, so we can only guess if he or she intended it to be like a history repeats itself sort of thing, but it comes off as just taking various scenes from the original and redoing them. It kind of reminds me of Gus Van Sant's Psycho remake, with it being an experiment to see if an old 1960s script can work in modern day. That's kind of what they do here, not nearly as bad, but it's still not that great either. It does have some new interesting tidbits, like with a traumatized Brackett, the Michael Myers cult, and that sort of thing. But it still mainly takes various plot points from the first two movies and inserts them here. Also, there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of Halloween 3 references, to the point where they go out of their way to mention the commercial, the microchips in the masks, and the big giveaway at 11. To the point where I assume they tried to recanonize the events of the third movie into this universe, which doesn't make a ton of sense since the Halloween movies are movies in the Halloween 3 universe, but whatever. In terms of the script being poorly written, the main reason I say that is because the continuity between scenes is very poor and hard to follow. Like when Brackett shoots the kid. At first it says it's in an alleyway, but then a page later it says they're in the middle of the street, and with no connection of how he got there. Or how the Wallace house is a free clinic, yet when Brackett and Lindsay go into it later in the script, it's described as almost being abandoned. Or how at the end of the script, despite only being a year later, Willard is described as being an older teenager / young adult, even though he was like 6 to 8 years old in the rest of the script. So how that works is beyond me. Plus, if Willard is being set up as the next Shape because he was Moyer's brother, why didn't Laurie become a Shape? Is Samhain sexist or something? Because that doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I felt Tommy was pointless outside of being a deus ex machina at the end, which also doesn't make sense because how did he know that they were there? With a homemade rocket launcher, no less. Which also doesn't make sense because Brackett is described as having a fucking bazooka throughout the script, yet he never fucking uses it. Either the writer doesn't know what a bazooka is, or they just literally forgot about it. But it does make a point that I want to make. It would have made way more sense to have Tommy be the sheriff. You could still have the trauma with his character without reiterating too much from the original, with Brackett running around with a doctor. You can definitely tell this was a first draft because there are way too many problems script-wise for this to make sense. Overall, I don't hate it because I feel as though if you flesh this out in 2 or 3 more drafts, there could have been a good sequel idea here, but unfortunately this is all we got. By the way, you're also probably asking yourself, why the fuck is this called Halloween 3000? Well, my theory is this. Due to the fact it's essentially the third film, and they can't call it Halloween 3 since there already is a Halloween 3, and it takes place in the 2000s, I have a feeling that the 3 represents the third movie, and the thousands represents the time period. But again, that's just my theory. So, why wasn't this made? All that's known is that this was rejected by Bob Weinstein. Pretty much nothing else is known about this movie. Hell, it could even be a fan script that people think was official when it wasn't, as some sort of elaborate prank, because with the way it was written, that's entirely possible. Next is Halloween: The Missing Years, written by Jake Wade Wall in 2006. Now, before I start, I have no idea where Halloween 3000 falls into, because nothing is known about it except for the script, as I stated before, so it's entirely possible that it could have been even after all of this and the dates were wrong. But I have no way of knowing. I just wanted to reiterate that before I continue. Despite this, let's move on. There was still some legal trouble with Halloween. Disney was holding Miramax close and not giving it up. However, they were more lenient with Dimension and kinda just pretty much let the Weinsteins have it. As long as they paid the fees and actually continued to make sequels they had under Dimension. So they were back in business. In regards to Halloween, that is. A little after this was settled, an inside source on Creature Corner was saying how they had written a draft for the 9th film 2 years ago, but it was removed, and now, as the Weinstein Company, they won't be doing any Halloween sequels. The most recent version of the story would have involved Laurie being a vision to Michael. Yeah, fucking weird. But Malik Akkad squashed this rumor, stating that this was not true, and he didn't know who this guy even was. So that was the end of that. Now, in regards to Halloween 9, Trancas was looking at pitches to see what could work. Enter Jake Wade Wall, who you'll remember from Appleton and Keeble's Retribution. He did a draft of that while also doing his own called Halloween Abduction. So he was technically working under Dimension and Trancas for the last couple years trying to create their precious Halloween 9. The only actual production he had under his name was the remake of When a Stranger Calls. When Trancas told him to write a movie about Smith's Grove, Wall took the idea and ran with it, pitching a movie called Halloween: The Missing Years, which was apparently fleshed out to a full script. It proposed an idea of being a prequel following young Michael at the sanitarium. However, with no script, very little is known about it and only speculation. Dated April 18th, 2005, Halloween: The Missing Years was to open with a flashback to the original film's prologue. In Wall's own words, the camera was to turn on right where it turned off in the original. In line with this thought, we presumably would have caught up with what happened on the night of October 31st, 1963, in the aftermath of 6-year-old Michael's murder of his older sister Judith. The story would have then briefly touched upon his apprehension and sentencing to Smith's Grove Sanitarium. With a segment of the script covering his years of incarceration under the care of Dr. Loomis, the audience would have followed Michael's time at the asylum right up until his escape on Halloween 1978. Prior to the second act, the story would then shift to pick up after the events of the second film. Burnt to a crisp after the fiasco at Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, we would have learned that the Shape had survived his night of terror, having managed to avoid detection while escaping the building's fiery ruins. With Laurie Strode and Dr. Loomis transferred to other medical facilities, the Shape would have had nowhere to go and no one to hunt. In turn, he would venture back to his true home, the town of Smith's Grove. The story would again shift to presumably a year later, considered present day in Wall's script, as that small town prepares their Halloween celebrations. During this, we learn that the Shape's former residence, the local asylum, had shut down its doors in the wake of 1978's mass breakout. In the interim, the facility has been abandoned and left to rot. The derelict building now plays host to a number of parties held by the town's rebellious youth, many of them who are familiar with the Michael Myers legend, his antics in Haddonfield, and the relation to their town. With no reason to fear, however, another batch of soon-to-be unlucky teenagers pop into the old asylum for a Halloween night party, only to come face-to-face with their former neighbor. And that's all we have. So, the film was to be more of a prequel-sequel rather than purely a prequel. It would have followed Michael post-Halloween opening pre-rest of the film, but also post-Halloween 2, showcasing how he survived that night, essentially being the Michael Myers Halloween 3 that we never got. However, it is worth noting that this would be in the H2O timeline rather than the Jamie timeline. There is only speculation on how Wall would have handled this, and there was some evidence in regards to Dr. Loomis's Wall in H2O on murders we hadn't seen before. So it's entirely possible that this version would have shed some sort of light on that as well. But again, only speculation. I do like this idea, although it would be nice to have more than just tidbits here and there. Not a huge fan of the backstory with Michael, but the fact it would have also been a sequel to 2 and a prequel to H2O could have been pretty cool. Although you'd have to figure out timeline stuff because it would probably have to leave no survivors, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning. So why wasn't this made? Mainly the stuff with the Weinsteins was still kind of a mess. They weren't a real company until October 1st. Very applicable, and didn't get their catalog until late summer, as well as Nick Phillips, the Dimension exec behind Halloween 9 and pushed for Wall to be a part of the project, left the company. As well as the list of films on the slate to be released by Dimension was a Halloween remake. Malek Akkad did state that while the remake was on the slate, they were focusing their attention on Halloween 9 as well. But that seemed to be crowd control since the response to a remake was largely negative, obviously. It didn't help that a month after this was revealed, Mustafa Akkad passed away from injuries from the 2005 Amman bombings on November 11th, along with his daughter. So with developing this movie, they also had to deal with this tragedy. But despite this, they slowly got back on track and started looking at various directors. Dante Tomaselli pitched a Halloween sequel, but he was turned down. Wall's script was still on the back burner, but due to studio politics, Wall's involvement on the making of the film involving his script would be limited and would result in the project being ceased altogether. On June 4th, 2006, it would then be revealed that Rob Zombie would be helming the Halloween remake. With that, the idea of a Halloween 9 would be looked over in favor of a remake. Next is Halloween 3D, written by Todd Farmer and Patrick Lussier in 2009. 3 years had come and gone, and Rob Zombie wrote and directed his Halloween remake and the sequel to that remake. After that, Zombie was not interested in making any more Halloween movies, but Weinstein was. Zombie was hesitant after Halloween 2, with Julian Maury and Alexander Bustillo, I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly, being considered to take over, but Zombie ultimately came back. Now he was firm and definite that a Halloween 3 with him at the helm was not going to happen, but Weinstein was going to make it happen with or without Zombie. He even contacted Todd Farmer and Patrick Lussier to write a third film while Zombie was still making Halloween 2, with Weinstein announcing a Halloween 3 in August of 2009. Both Farmer and Lussier had a lot of horror credits under their belt combined. Farmer had written Jason X and The Messengers. Lussier had directed the Dracula 2000 trilogy, Prophecy 3, and White Noise 2, as well as editing H2O, New Nightmare, and the Scream trilogy. Not a total loss. It was then decided earlier on that it would be a 3D film, with Lussier's expertise coming in as he directed and Farmer had co-written My Bloody Valentine 3D. Weinstein's decision to do this was because Halloween 2 was defeated in box office to The Final Destination, another 3D film, so Weinstein thought that this was the way to go. Eventually, they had a meeting with Malik Akkad, a Dimension exec named Matthew Stein, and the boss himself, Bob Weinstein. They all loved their ideas, especially Akkad. They wanted this entire movie to be done and released by October of next year. Keep in mind, this is early September of 2009, so that release date would be difficult, especially when Farmer and Lussier were getting ready to make their film Drive Angry. So another idea was proposed: have the entire film written and filmed by the end of the year. Again, I will remind you, it's September 2009, so that feat would be next to impossible. Also worth noting, this movie would be a sequel to the theatrical ending of Halloween 2, since Zombie had not made his director's cut yet. Halloween 3D picks up where the theatrical cut of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 ended, or rather just before that, since it technically ends with Laurie institutionalized. Having just fired upon Michael in the rundown shack, Sheriff Brackett and his officers rush in to find Laurie alive, Loomis dead, and Michael missing. We learn it was actually Laurie who killed Loomis after hallucinating he was her brother. Laurie immediately confesses to Loomis's murder, but Brackett insists she be placed in his car uncuffed. Psychiatrist Josie Blair arrives on the scene to help. Michael soon reappears and attacks Brackett. To the sheriff's horror, Laurie willingly leaves with her brother for Haddonfield Cemetery to exhume their mother's corpse. An unfortunate group of trespassing teens stumble upon this macabre family reunion. All are killed except one, a girl named Amy, whom they trap in Deborah Meyer's empty coffin along with her boyfriend's severed head. Police soon catch up to the Myers siblings and a violent clash ensues. Laurie fatally shoots Brackett as he rushes to her aid. Dr. Blair is slashed across the back but escapes. Officer Cooper Goodman engages Michael in brutal hand-to-hand combat, which ends with the slasher trapped inside a burning ambulance as it hurtles into a dam. He is presumed dead, though his body is never recovered. Goodman is severely injured but lives. The story then jumps forward a year to the J. Burton Psychiatric Hospital. Amy has been receiving intensive treatment here for the trauma she experienced the previous Halloween. In an unfortunate move, Dr. Blair admits Laurie strode to the girls' wing on the same day Amy is scheduled to leave. They cross paths in the hallway, which leads Amy to attack Laurie, thus scuttling her planned discharge. This results in Laurie and Amy being housed on the same behavioral unit, with Halloween rapidly approaching. Elsewhere, we catch up with Cooper Goodman, who strongly believes Michael somehow survived in the burning ambulance, even if no one else does. Hell-bent on revenge, Goodman harbors a secret plan to catch the slasher, part of which involves having Deborah Meyer's corpse cremated. As we already know, his instincts are correct. Haddonfield's most famous son has returned. He immediately steals a new copy of his white mask from a local costume shop, killing an employee in the process. Back at the hospital, doctors Blair and Kibner struggle to keep Laurie using conventional therapies. Kibner opts to directly confront Laurie over Brackett's murder, which she has previously been in complete denial of. It's here the cracks in her identity begin to show. Is she Laurie Strode or Angel Myers? Good girl or psycho killer? Laurie will waver between these identities throughout the story, which leads to much conflict with her peers. Having tracked Laurie to the hospital, Michael infiltrates its psych wing. He murders much of the patients and staff in gory fashion, including Dr. Kibner. Laurie and Amy's delinquent hallmates team up against the slasher, though they're unable to stop him. Having anticipated that Michael would return for Laurie, Goodman catches up to them both at the hospital. He plans to destroy Michael, and possibly Laurie as well, with a bomb hidden inside an urn containing their mother's ashes. They don't take the bait, however, and flee the facility while also setting free its patients. Michael and Laurie head for a giant Halloween festival at nearby Pliskin Park with Cooper, Dr. Blair, and Amy in tow. The heroes beg Laurie to reject her family's madness while still trying to destroy her brother. Keen to Goodman's plan, Michael takes the bomb from his mother's urn and gorily implants it into his stomach. It soon explodes, obliterating the former cop. Amy cuffs herself to Laurie to prevent her from rejoining her brother, but Laurie cleaves off her own hand to escape and goes to him anyway. Bleeding to death, Laurie pleads, "I'm sorry, I just want it all to stop. Michael, I'm not you." Appearing to understand, the hulking slasher takes Laurie into his arms while fatally stabbing her. He gently cradles her until her final breath. A further traumatized Amy watches on in horror as Michael escapes into the night. This is a tough one for me to judge since I have not watched, nor do I care about zombies Halloween films. So this movie has little bearing on me, but I'll try to showcase my thoughts just from a movie standpoint. From what I have seen of his films, it does follow the mind of Rob Zombie in terms of grisly brutality and bleak nature. I liked the idea of Laurie being torn between a Myers or a Strode to the point where she had dissociative identity disorder. That could have been an intriguing arc for her, ultimately not choosing to be like her brother. The rest of it is pretty much just fucked up levels of violence, although the Amy character could have been interesting as well as being a good foil to Laurie, as well as most of the movie taking place entirely in Smith's Grove, going back to that idea from the many scripts of Halloween 9. Plus, this movie goes back to the spirit of Carpenter's vision a bit more, with less white trash crap and having Michael's costume be more like the original blue coveralls and white mask, as well as Farmer and Lussier trying to remystify Michael again and make him creepier. Apparently, Farmer and Lussier wanted Kibner to be played by Halloween 3 alum Tom Atkins, who would eventually play a part in Drive Angry, which would have been nice to see. There even would have been a reference to Halloween 3 with the Silver Shamrock jingle playing on a TV. Not a huge fan of 3D films, and I'm glad the fad died out quickly in terms of specially made 3D films. Now it's just a bonus for some movies if you see them in IMAX. Not necessarily bad films inherently, just not that big of a deal when you think about it. Cooper Goodman could have been an interesting character, adding back in that detective character from the original Halloween 7. Dr. Blair seems more like an accurate version of Loomis, since Zombie went out of his way to ruin the original character for some reason in his movies. Even Blair stating outright Loomis was a prick, possibly agreeing with the audience of Loomis's actions in Halloween 2. She wouldn't have been OG Loomis exactly, but more along the lines of a doctor character that actually wants to help as well as being rather intelligent. So why wasn't this made? Money. Pretty much. After the somewhat disappointing Halloweens 1 and 2, as well as 2009 being a shit year in general, Weinstein wanted to get this made and made fast because of the financial trouble at the time. Tyler Mane and Scout Taylor Compton were approached to reprise their roles, with the latter being open to the idea, but unsure if she wanted to return, especially if the production was rushed. As I stated, Kibner was to be played by Tom Atkins, and Eddie Gethegi, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, was in discussions to play Goodman. Makeup designers, location scouts, and other such crew were added to the doomed production, which was to be filmed in Louisiana, close to where Drive Angry was being prepped. When Farmer and Lussier finished the script and handed it off, Akkad and Stein were fans of it, but Weinstein was quiet. This was due to financial matters, and he said that more time was needed for the production. Eventually, it just petered out because they were simply too broke to film the project. Eventually, Farmer and Lussier went off to film Drive Angry, and Halloween 3D was in development limbo for the time being. The final nail had not been hammered into this coffin just yet. Next is Halloween 3D, written by Stef Hutchinson in 2009. When it comes to the sequel to Rob Zombie's degenerate version of the Michael Myers mythos, there were two distinct versions from both sides. The Farmer and Lussier version was more so being developed on the Dimension side. It was mainly headed by Weinstein as he was moving all the pieces around and pushed for the production to happen. But after that died out, there was the Stef Hutchinson treatment of Halloween 3D. Hutchinson got famous in the Halloween community due to his documentary Halloween 25 Years of Terror, and eventually many comic books set in the various timelines of the franchise. He worked closely with Malek Akkad, who he met with after the Farmer and Lussier Halloween 3D fell through. He offered to pitch his own Halloween 3D, which Akkad accepted with the only stipulation that it be in 3D. It never got farther than a treatment, which was dated November 18th, 2009. This Halloween 3D opens at the Nichols home in Langdon, Illinois on October 27th. Little Bobby has begun to suffer nightmares lately of a terrifying boogeyman. Shortly after being tucked in, he's attacked by an unseen figure in his bedroom. Hearing his screams, Mrs. Nichols wakes to find her husband in bed beside her, with his throat slit. Panicked, she runs into the hall and directly into Michael Myers, who kills her. At once, the house is again quiet, the outside world blissfully unaware of the carnage within. The opening credits play over top footage of a jack-o'-lantern in darkness. The background slowly illuminates to reveal an entire field of jack-o'-lanterns. Jumping ahead to October 31st, we find a retired Lee Brackett laying flowers at his daughter's grave. It's been 3 years since Halloween 2, which ended with Loomis and Laurie dying and Michael's body never being recovered. Brackett now lives in Langdon, a good distance from Haddonfield. We learn he was fired from his job as sheriff when his own officers caught him burning down the Myers house. Being the anniversary of his daughter's death, Haddonfield authorities ask that Langdon's Sheriff Hall check on Brackett. Hall finds the former lawman's home littered with case files related to Michael Myers. Most think Brackett is crazy for still hunting his daughter's killer, but not Hall. He somberly asks whether Brackett wants to kill Michael to save lives or to exact revenge, but never gets a response. Brackett is unaware that Hall has 2 officers shadowing him today. Just then, the retired sheriff's teenage niece, Alice Brackett, arrives with a gift of homemade cookies on the most difficult of days. A perpetually single bookworm, Alice is the least popular of her social circle. Her best friends include Cassie, a happy-go-lucky 17-year-old, and Phoebe, a cheerleader whose boyfriend is a star player on the football team. Tonight is Langdon's first ever homecoming, which is being commemorated with a parade, fireworks, a football game, and a school dance. As part of a bitter love triangle, Cassie becomes the target of a mean-spirited prank in which her crush plans to seduce her, but only to get nude photos to distribute amongst their peers. Elsewhere, a local hunter finds Brackett using pumpkins for target practice. The 2 men set off for a local diner, but their truck slams into a large horned white-tailed buck. Uneasy over the animal's death, Brackett leaves the hunter to dispose of the roadkill. Michael Myers appears a moment later and impales the hunter on the buck's antlers. The returned slasher then ventures into town to begin stalking Cassie, even coming face to face with her during the homecoming parade. Hearing news of Cassie's stalker, an unsettled Alice alerts her uncle. As the night falls on Haddonfield, we see Michael in the Nichols home from the opening. Standing over Mrs. Nichols' corpse, he dons his classic white mask in preparation for a night of terror. Brackett, too, is preparing, arming himself with heavy artillery and a photo of Annie. Cassie falls victim to the aforementioned prank during the homecoming game, though Michael kills the prankster soon after. He chases a horrified Cassie back to the school where teachers phone Sheriff Hall. Tipped off by Alice, Brackett rushes to the school and begs Cassie to remain in an open space as bait to draw Michael out of the shadows. Hall strongly objects to this, but Cassie agrees and goes to the dance. Michael enters the school soon after, slaughtering Phoebe and the entire cheerleading squad in the girls' locker room. He then crashes the dance by lighting Phoebe's boyfriend on fire and sending him into the crowded gymnasium. This causes panic while also setting the school ablaze. The final chase boils down to Cassie, Brackett, and Michael. Brackett is forced to choose between saving Cassie's life or ending Michael's. He ultimately chooses to save Cassie, redeeming himself from his self-destructive quest for vengeance. Michael vanishes into the night once more. Sheriff Hall wonders aloud why Michael didn't kill Brackett when given the chance. The retired sheriff replies that having already murdered his daughter, there's nothing else he could do to hurt me. Hall then makes a startling confession. Some time ago, Annie's grave had been dug up in Haddonfield Cemetery. Authorities later found her body and casket on display at Brackett's former home, presumably as revenge for burning down the Myers house. Believing Brackett to be Michael's true target, Hall withheld this information and used him as bait to catch the slasher, similar to how Brackett used Cassie as bait. Arriving home, Brackett notices something unsettling across the street. A scarecrow decoration with the severed head of the white-tailed buck from earlier. Brackett rushes into his neighbor's house, which we recognize as the Nichols family home, to find the slaughtered family of 3. Written in blood on the wall is a name: Alice. With this, Michael's true plan comes into focus. To further hurt Brackett, he would go after someone else he loved, his teenage niece. By slaughtering the Nichols family, he was able to use their home to spy on his nemesis from across the street. This is where he took notice of Alice. Michael therefore only pretended to focus on Cassie as a diversion, manipulating the situation to his advantage. With so much focus on Cassie, he was able to isolate his true target. A panicked Brackett phones Alice's home. We see the bodies of her parents in the living room as the phone rings unanswered. Elsewhere in a vacant field, a large bonfire rages amid a sea of glowing jack-o'-lanterns. Having been tied to a wood pyre, Alice screams as the flames envelop her. Tilting his head, the shape watches as she burns to death. He has won. That was fucking dark. The brutality and fucked up nature of this treatment knows no bounds. I like how Lee Brackett is the main focus here because I really like Brad Dourif as an actor, and him becoming the main focus of this franchise was a good move. This treatment had Laurie dying in the opening, very similar to Zombie's director's cut, and it's assumed that this was a sequel to that. But ironically, it had not been released yet at this point, so it's just a mere coincidence. Kind of amusing. I like how despite the brutality, it is more grounded and has less of those weird dream sequences that I've seen clips of. I feel as though that similar with the previous Halloween 3D, this tries for a more balanced approach between Carpenter and Zombie, even if it takes more notes from the latter since this would have been part of his story. I like the opening and the mystery in regards to that, and I like how everything is revealed at the end, showcasing a smarter Michael, which I do like. Because Hutchinson actually tries to give him a personality and make him more than just Diet Jason. The mystery in regards to what's really going on involving all these characters is really intriguing because of how Hutchinson actually executes these ideas. If this did get fleshed out into a script, I just would have hoped to not have it be a giant exposition dump. I think the worst thing that this treatment has going for it is the fact that it is way too dark and way too mean-spirited to the character of Brackett. Which is saying a lot considering that this is a horror movie, and not only that, a sequel to a horror movie directed by one of the most brutal and fucked up directors ever. I still like plenty of the story ideas, the mystery, the grounded approach, the balance between tones, and Brackett taking center stage. But the ending with his niece burning in a bonfire might be a bit too much, as well as the constant shitting on Brackett throughout the rest of the treatment. You have more references to the Festival of Samhain, which is just stupid. I don't get this need to make Michael supernatural and connect him to the origins of Halloween. Again, I like this stuff with Brackett in regards to grief and him being a broken man trying to move on and redeem himself. The new characters seem fine, but nothing incredibly noteworthy since this is Brackett's story. So why wasn't this made? 2 reasons. Hutchinson wasn't a huge fan of this pitch, and again, the money issues with the Weinstein Company. Hutchinson wanted to deliver a bleak tale, and he felt that adding 3D to that would have ruined that idea. So he left despite the positive reception from Akkad. And since this was a couple weeks after the failure of the Farmer and Lussier version due to money issues, it makes little sense that Weinstein would have started another production despite being fucking broke. So, with this, Halloween 3D was dead. Next is Halloween 3.0, written by Todd Farmer and Patrick Lussier in 2011. Now, that title and those writers will cause some confusion, but stay with me here. After the failure of Halloween 3D, Lussier and Farmer would go on to work on Drive Angry, which ended up bombing at the box office, but had very good critical reception. They did go back to the Weinstein Company to work with them on various projects, like a Hellraiser reboot that never saw the light of day. And instead of that, we got Hellraiser Revelations shat out on direct-to-video just so Dimension could keep the rights. With this, they turned their attention back to Halloween. They were pretty much uninterested in making a sequel to the zombie films, mainly because of how the director's cut of Halloween 2 killed our monster, our protagonist, and our major supporting character. With this, they thought that Farmer and Lussier could take another crack at the shape, however they go about it. Some ideas from Weinstein was a PG-13 Halloween or a found footage film. Again, they were losing money, so they needed to make a quick buck, and those would be profitable and or cheap to make. But Farmer and Lussier were having none of that. So they ultimately decided to do this weird reimagining of the Halloween franchise with a treatment called Halloween 3.0, which is described as a sequel to a remake that never happened. Halloween 3.0 kicks off with a recap of the original Halloween's ending, all newly refilmed to feature an updated cast. We find teenage babysitter Laurie Strode under attack by Michael Myers in a darkened house. This is all very familiar, right up until the moment we expect Loomis to rush in and save Laurie from strangulation. That doesn't happen here. Instead, windows shatter as police in tactical gear come crashing into the room. Michael is shot numerous times and apprehended in a violent confrontation. Dr. Loomis then enters, revealing that this was a trap intended to catch his escaped patient. Michael would never have let his guard down for anyone but Laurie. Even while shackled, Michael still manages to kill 2 officers before being unmasked and loaded into a police van. Sometime later, we find Loomis begging a state review board to allow his patient to be tried for his crimes and ultimately put to death. We can never allow him to escape again, but he will, no matter what we do, no matter what precautions we take. Michael is smarter than any of you realize, and he counts on us to underestimate him. His silence is nothing more than a weapon to lull us into making a mistake, and any mistake with him will result in another murder spree. That is why I beg you to find Michael Myers sane. He must stand trial. He must be convicted, and he must be executed. We must seek and get the death penalty. There is no rehabilitation. There is no redemption. To stop Michael Myers from ever killing again, there is only one solution: death. This dramatic speech is intercut with clips of Michael's murders set during and before the first Halloween. It's here that we glimpse at a slightly different origin story for the character. Instead of only murdering his sister on Halloween night 15 years ago, we find that he also murdered her boyfriend and his own parents. Back in the present, it seems that Loomis's warnings fall on deaf ears as Michael remains institutionalized rather than imprisoned. 2 years later, Loomis arrives to work one October night to find the hospital engulfed in flames. Worried that Michael might escape in the chaos, he rushes inside with a shotgun, intent on finally ending the slasher's life. Script: he must be sure Michael dies, but it's like hunting a raptor in a maze of fire filled with shrieking lunatics. The vigilante psychiatrist manages to corner his escaped patient just as the building explodes. Loomis barely escapes with his life. First responders scour the burned-out hospital and discover a charred corpse with a mask melted onto its face. Authorities assert that this is clearly Michael Myers, but Loomis isn't so sure. He insists on DNA identification, which will take days to complete. Loomis grows increasingly paranoid about the hospital fire and fears that Michael is somehow still alive, which of course he is. The escaped slasher steals a new white mask from a nearby Halloween store before murdering its 2 teenage employees and burning it to the ground. Loomis immediately suspects his former patient, but police maintain that Michael Myers is dead. Loomis tries phoning Laurie to warn of her brother's likely approach, but the number has been disconnected. In actuality, Laurie has secretly moved west to Seattle to live with the Tate family. Loomis visits her former boyfriend, Desmond, who divulges Laurie's secret whereabouts. Unbeknownst to either, Michael is hovering nearby and kills Desmond and his new girlfriend following this meeting. Loomis returns a moment later to find their bodies and immediately phones Haddonfield's Sheriff Tyler. Police arrive and discover fabricated evidence that it was Loomis, not Michael, who murdered Desmond and his girlfriend. Jesus Christ, he wanted us to believe Myers was back bad enough to kill these 2 innocent kids. Having fallen into his trap, Loomis is arrested on Halloween morning on suspicion of murder. Using his one phone call, Loomis phones the Tate family from jail to warn them of the approaching danger. Unfortunately, Michael is already there. Mr. and Mrs. Tate then phone Laurie, who's babysitting their young daughter at a friend's house. Both are murdered just as the call connects, which Laurie overhears. Alarmed, she calls Loomis for help and learns he's been arrested for murder. Michael immediately travels to the house where Laurie is babysitting with a 16-year-old Kit Tate and friends. A stalk-and-slash sequence unfolds, resulting in several deaths. Only Laurie, Kit, and the children make it out alive. Discovering yet another grisly scene at the Tate residence, Laurie offloads the kids and heads for Haddonfield's police department. Her brother is but a few steps behind, arriving at police headquarters just after she does. Michael slaughters much of the night shift en route to his old doctor. Thinking quick, Laurie grabs a dead officer's keys and rather than freeing Loomis, locks herself inside the cell with him. Michael tries reaching them through the bars but is unable to. In a shocking gesture, he instead offers Laurie his knife. Loomis, he's offering you an out. He wants you to kill me. Rejecting this invite to kill, Laurie insists she's not like him. Michael retrieves his own set of keys and tries entering the cell, prompting a violent struggle that ends with Sheriff Tyler shooting him several times. Though wounded, the slasher puts up a fight and ultimately bests his opponent in gory fashion. As Laurie and Loomis flee the station, they notice Michael disappearing into a nearby house with a hostage, Kit Tate. Inside, they find the word home scrawled in blood on a wall. Realizing the old Myers house is nearby, Loomis and Laurie follow after a final showdown. Michael quickly murders Kit and stabs Loomis in the stomach before again offering Laurie his knife. Sensing her refusal to kill Loomis, he removes his mask and places it on her head. After a tense pause, Laurie stabs her brother in the heart and they collapse to the floor. She cradles him as he appears to draw his last breath. Police and EMS soon arrive on the scene. A wounded Loomis tries explaining the situation to Laurie. He needed you to be like him. That was the only thing that kept him going. As the ambulance pulls away with both inside, Laurie notices the driver dead on the roadside, meaning Michael is behind the wheel. He slams on the brakes and attacks the vehicle's occupants. Their scuffle eventually ignites an oxygen tank which blows Laurie out of the vehicle. She watches on in horror as the ambulance burns, a giant fireball rising into the night sky. Her brother's ultimate fate unknown. I'm on the fence about this one. It is certainly unique and reminiscent of a much more famous canceled Halloween film, which I will get into later. I like how it does combine various aspects of different types of lore into one movie, which will be a recurring theme for the remainder of the canceled films. But I'm not totally sold on what it represents, because I feel as though general audiences would have been way too confused. This would have been a movie that would have been for hardcore fans only, and with that, they probably would have hated it. It mainly follows ideas from Halloween 2 and H2O, but there is also reminiscent aspects of the Thorn trilogy, with Loomis still trying to hunt Michael after all this time. It has some blending of Carpenter and Zombie, similar to their Halloween 3D pitch, but more of a focus on Carpenter than Zombie, rather than the other way around with their other script. This Loomis feels more like an action hero detective rather than a large, balding doctor like previously. The treatment even describes him as more of a Sean Bean type. The idea of Michael framing him, though, is great because I like the idea of Michael being actually smart to set him apart from the lumbering mama's boy of Jason and the disturbing comedy-driven nature of Freddy. Laurie is also good here, and I like how she and Loomis are working together, somewhat reminiscent of the Medina and Kelly Halloween 4 script, but more so hunting Michael rather than psychiatrist and patient. Plus, it has Laurie being more of a stronger heroine, but not the nearly invincible badass like in Halloween 2018. Not saying I hate that, but still, it's interesting to have this Laurie still have some humanity in her. But not to the point where she's ready to duke it out with Michael and literally fight her demons. I also like how Farmer and Lussier used some bits and pieces from their Halloween 3D script here. I don't think they were forced, but I feel it was utilized well and makes for a good mesh of ideas. But before we move on to why this wasn't made, there was in fact a different third act tacked onto the treatment in addition to the original third act. This alternate finale picks up as Laurie and Loomis exit the police station. They steal a cop car but are rammed by the Shape in another vehicle before they can escape. The Shape abducts Laurie and disappears into the night. Dazed from the crash, Loomis runs to a nearby neighborhood where a giant Halloween party is underway, complete with a massive decorative pumpkin. Recognizing the area, he realizes where Michael has taken Laurie, to their old family home. Inside the Myers house, the Shape places his mask on her head before handing her his knife and gesturing to his chest. Sobbing and confused, Laurie refuses to stab her brother. Before he can respond, police in tactical gear storm the house. Michael immediately kills several officers, but he's taken down with a bullet to the back. Another cop aims his gun for Michael's head, but is stabbed by Laurie before he can pull the trigger. As the officer recoils, he shoots Laurie. A wounded Shape escapes the carnage carrying his also wounded sister. They stop down the road near the giant pumpkin. Laurie places her brother's mask onto his head and apologizes. "I'm sorry. I'm not like you." With this, she takes his knife gripped tightly in his hand and places it over her chest. After a pause, Michael buries it into her heart. An injured Loomis arrives a moment later to find Laurie dead and her brother gone. A short time later, Loomis is being tended to in an ambulance when he thinks he sees the Shape off in the distance. A moment later, the figure is gone. This is an interesting third act and follows more so the Halloween 3D ending they had. It's not bad, but it is sadder and bleaker. However, I still think this third act works just as well as the other one, as well as more sequel potential with just a new Loomis rather than dealing with a familial connection that not a lot of people like. Moving on though, why wasn't this made? Well, the Weinstein Company never followed up because they're run by dumbasses. Halloween didn't have much of a direction to go in after this, but also the Weinsteins had no creative direction to implement any proper ideas that could be used. So this just collected dust until another opportunity fell into their lap. Next is Platinum Dunes Halloween, written by Scott Malam in 2012. After 2 different Halloween 3 sequels and a weird requel, Weinstein had no idea what they were going to do for the next Halloween movie, but still announced one was coming out in October of 2012, which at this point was a year and a half away. Farmer and Lussier were pretty sure that it wasn't their scripts that were happening. Definitely not. 2 writers, Ben Collins and Luke Piotrowski, were hired to make a treatment, which they eventually pitched in spring of 2012, but nothing ever came of it. With this, another release date got removed from the schedule. However, on April 1st, 2012, not an April Fool's joke, it was announced that the Weinstein Company was teaming up with Platinum Dunes on the next Halloween film, which they had already done on the Amityville Horror remake. Originally, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake was pitched to Weinstein in 2003, but he wasn't interested, and it went on to make over $100 million at the box office on a $9.5 million budget. Obviously, he regretted that and didn't want that kind of money slipping through his fingers again, which fueled Weinstein's want for a remake rather than a sequel to the Halloween franchise. However, there were some things wrong with this article, mainly with the fact that Platinum Dunes and the Weinstein Company working together wasn't finalized, just that they were taking some pitches from them as well as several other companies. During this time, Dimension was, once again, non-committal to anything and didn't know what they wanted. Meanwhile, Platinum Dunes never settled on a singular pitch to work with. Some were remakes, some were sequels to other movies. Matt Venn wrote one, if you remember him from the Asylum 05 script, but the one that we will be talking about here is in fact a remake. It was one of many brought to the attention of Dimension by Platinum Dunes, and a look into what might have been. Scott Malam's tale opens with a prologue set in the unspecified past. On Halloween night, young Michael Myers and pal Sean Carver are abducted by a mysterious stranger while out trick-or-treating. Their little sisters, Laurie and Rachel, are witness to this shocking kidnapping. All the while, Michael and Laurie's older sister Judith, tasked with watching the children, is distracted by her boyfriend. Despite an intense search, the two boys are never found, leading the oldest Myers son Daniel to forever resent Judith for her irresponsibility this tragic night. 10 years later, we find Rachel Carver and Laurie Myers now in high school. Rachel has grown to hate Halloween as a result of her childhood trauma. Her boyfriend suggests they spend this holiday taking the ferry to Port Townsend, a nearby community that doesn't celebrate All Hallows Eve. With her parents having died 6 years ago, Laurie has moved in with brother Daniel. Judith left home at 18, though she and Laurie keep in touch. Daniel is now a homicide detective, a career path we can attribute to his enduring obsession with what happened to Michael and Sean a decade ago. He's soon called to the abandoned grounds of what used to be the Smiths Grove Sanitarium, where a teenage paintballer claims his friends were murdered. Daniel searches the property and locates the mutilated youths along with some very strange graffiti. In launching an investigation, he calls upon Dr. Sam Loomis to assist. No longer a practicing psychiatrist, Loomis now works as an advisor for the FBI's homicide division. After some initial discussion, Loomis and Daniel hear gunshots in the distance. They rush outside to find two mutilated agents and an old truck fleeing the scene. A chase ensues, which leads them to an old farmhouse where several people had been living. Contained within is the decayed body of a young blonde-haired boy, who police suspect may possibly be Sean Carver. A DNA sample is sent out for identification. Meanwhile, Laurie's best friend Annie offers to handle her babysitting assignment so that Laurie can join Rachel and friends in Port Townsend. As night falls, we see a shadowy figure, the Shape, stalking Laurie's home in Haddonfield with Annie and the children inside. Glued to a horror movie marathon downstairs, little Tommy Doyle and Lindsay Wallace never hear Annie's screams upstairs. Upon finding their babysitter murdered, the children call for help. Loomis and Daniel rush to the house while across town. Rachel and friends board the ferry to Port Townsend, where spirited Halloween celebrations are underway. Having been lied to, Rachel is immediately upset and wants to go home. After struggling to regroup, most of the friends get back onto the ferry. Unbeknownst to them, the Shape has already murdered two of their ilk and is now on the ferry as well. Isolated from her friends, the Shape attacks Rachel, resulting in a violent chase across multiple levels of the ferry. Rachel's boyfriend tries valiantly to defend her, but is soon killed. On a different level, Laurie receives a call from Daniel, who is en route to the ferry with Loomis via helicopter. Daniel reveals he's learned that Michael might have returned, murdered Annie, and could be coming to kill her next. Baffled and horrified, Laurie and her boyfriend rush to find Rachel, who is still under attack. The Shape slaughters the boyfriend before throwing Laurie to the ground so forcefully that her bones crack. Just then, Daniel and Loomis reach the ferry. Daniel calls out his brother's name. In an effort to de-escalate this nightmare, he tells Michael that he never stopped loving him, nor did he ever stop searching for him. "Put the knife down, Michael. It's over. Please, let her go." For a brief moment, this seems to work, but the Shape soon raises his knife to kill Rachel and is shot by Dr. Loomis before he can do so. Even this fails to stop him, however. Rachel crawls to a nearby car on the ferry and rams it into the Shape, sending them both overboard into the frigid waters below. Rachel swims to the surface, though the slasher remains pinned underwater by the car. Loomis to Daniel: "That wasn't your brother. Not anymore. That was evil. Pure evil. In the aftermath of the ferry attack, Daniel receives a disturbing call from the crime lab. The DNA sample from the farmhouse corpse does not match Sean Carver. Concurrent with this, we notice the dead shape's corpse floating in the Sound, blonde hair protruding from the tears in the mask. In actuality, this killer was not Michael Myers, but now an adult, Sean Carver. The treatment ends with Judith Myers returning home from work to find her boyfriend slain. In the shadows of her apartment, a dark figure emerges and unmasks. She recognizes the face. Michael? A knife hovers into frame and she gasps. Cut to black as the Halloween theme plays. I'm on the fence about this one. On the one hand, it's Platinum Dunes, so it probably would have sucked donkey dicks like so many of their other remakes. However, I do like some of these ideas. How so much lore is now finally combined into one story was really great and interesting, adding in bits from the original, the remake, and plenty of the sequels, as well as its own personal touches here and there. The twist that it wasn't actually Michael, but was in fact Sean was incredibly obvious since two boys were taken, so it makes sense that both of them would become the Shape. I like how Judith Myers has more of a role, and that history weirdly repeats itself with how she isn't the first kill, but instead the final kill that sets up more of this universe if this ever came to be. Kinda clever. The stuff on the ferry could have been a good climax. I also respect how Mullins tries to not follow tropes in a different and unique way. Some hit the right notes, some don't, but I appreciate that Mullins tries to do different things. Different doesn't necessarily mean good, but hey, again, I still appreciate that aspect. I like how there are two final girls, with Lori, who is nothing like her 1978 counterpart and seems more like a normal teen, and then Rachel, who more so fits the accomplished idea of a final girl, like how she's steadfast and strong from the beginning rather than fulfills that at the end. Something I don't like is that in this movie, Ben Tramer dies fucking again! This poor guy can't catch a break. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of Daniel Myers, but I see what he was trying to do in regards to the character, having that familial connection. Not bad, but not good either. I also don't mind that Michael, as well as Sean, gets abducted because we don't know what happened to these kids, if anything at all. While I do still think it's scary that he just snaps, and that person in question being a 6-year-old boy for no reason at all, the abduction brings about a very different air of mystery and creepiness for entirely different reasons. Obviously, we don't know what would have happened with this movie, so I'm kind of torn on its various aspects. So why wasn't this made? Mainly because of Dimension having absolutely no direction of where they wanted this franchise to go. Platinum Dunes eventually just got fed up and moved on, while Weinstein still couldn't figure this franchise out. Maybe it was for the better, considering Mullins eventually went on to write Leatherface. Ugh. Next is the Reboot Trilogy, written by Stef Hutchinson in 2012. No, not the one you're thinking of. Dimension was caught in a bind. Platinum Dunes left after their fickle nature with the remake. They had no desire to continue the H2O timeline, and they had no desire to return to the zombie series. They didn't know what to do, and they simply didn't have the creative talents to make something truly inventive. They just wanted something made to make more money off this franchise. Enter Stef Hutchinson once again. After his Halloween 3D didn't become much of anything, his comics ceasing production, going on to direct various other documentaries in various horror franchises, and writing other horror franchise comics, he had an idea. A very, very big idea to imbue the Halloween franchise with a new sense of direction that it so desperately needed. He was working on a special edition of Alan Howarth's Halloween 4 soundtrack when he noticed that the Halloween creativity dried up at this point. Horror was in a bad state as well, with Paranormal Activity 4 being the top grossing horror film of that year, with only $54 million raking in at the box office, the lowest it's been in over a decade. Almost everything had been remade at this point, and making a sequel to a movie that reached a decade old was ludicrous, especially considering that most people hate the film. Hutchinson's idea was to reinvent the franchise in a really unique way, with that being long-form storytelling and open the door for new ideas in films. This would result in a trilogy of films, with only the first getting a full treatment called Rise of the Boogeyman, and the two sequels, The Witching Hour and The Fires of Samhain, only getting rough outlines. Similar to the Josh Sullivan sequels, I'm going to be doing them all at once and then showcase my thoughts. First is Rise of the Boogeyman. The first chapter of Hutchinson's trilogy opens in Haddonfield on October 31st, 1984. 17-year-old Deborah Strode and her boyfriend Jake are babysitting 5-year-old Sally. They receive a phone call from a hysterical woman named Jennifer begging them to leave the house because the darkness is coming. Brushing this off as a prank, they ignore her warning. The house loses power and they're soon attacked by a young boy in a clown costume, who badly injures Deborah before killing her boyfriend. Having also been tipped off by Jennifer, police arrive just in time to see the boy plunge his knife into young Sally's skull. Yeah. Finding her to be highly disturbed, Jennifer is placed under the care of psychiatrist Sam Loomis. She attributes her foreknowledge of the night's attacks to a vision she saw while gazing through the veil separating life and death. Loomis, who considers this a delusion, seems utterly incapable of helping her. Jennifer will eventually commit suicide by self-immolating on the front lawn of Sally's home, which has been nicknamed the Murder House by locals. Jennifer to Loomis: I couldn't save them. You can't save anybody from these things, but I had to try. And now he's here. Do you know how many people they would sacrifice to keep the darkness away? The fires they'd set up on the hillside to burn women and children? The hills and the fields, they were drenched with rivers of blood. And it's going to happen again. We then flash forward to October 29th, 2015, in nearby Morton, Illinois. Loomis is now a family man with a supportive wife named Maria and 6-year-old son, David. He's about to begin a new job at Smith's Grove Psychiatric Hospital in Russellville, but it remains haunted by his previous failure to save Jennifer. Maria gives him a small present for good luck, a Zippo lighter engraved Sam. In touring Smith's Grove, Loomis encounters the boy from the opening, whose identity was never confirmed. Unofficially referred to as the Boogeyman, he's been largely catatonic for the past 3 decades. That doesn't stop him from spooking Loomis, however, who unknowingly drops his new lighter in the patient's cell. In his moment of terror, Loomis envisions quick flashes of a strange netherworld, similar to what Jennifer described years before. That night, a deadly fire breaks out at Smith's Grove. To the staff's horror, the patients also experience a synchronized mass seizure, banging their heads against the walls until bloodied and unconscious. Amid the chaos, the Boogeyman escapes into the night. Loomis is awoken several hours later with news of the fire. While heading in to help, he stops to buy a pack of cigarettes and notices his lighter missing. Mentally retracing his steps, he reaches the alarming conclusion that he must have dropped it in the Boogeyman's cell. Upon learning of the slasher's escape, Loomis speeds towards Haddonfield, believing the shape will return to his old stomping grounds. Elsewhere in Haddonfield, a pair of 17-year-olds, Annie Brackett and Laurie Strode, are discussing their Halloween plans. The ordinarily social Annie will be babysitting 8-year-old Kelly. In doing so, she'll be skipping a small Halloween party thrown by gal pal Tara, which promises booze, pills, and weed. Meanwhile, the socially awkward Laurie will be staying home with her mentally ill mother, whom we recognize as Deborah from the opening. Unfortunately, Laurie doesn't last until nightfall, instead encountering the shape in her bedroom. In a ghastly kill, he quite literally cuts her like a pumpkin. Across town, Sheriff Hall and Deputy Brackett are investigating a hardware store break-in where several masks were stolen, among other items. Upon arriving in town, Loomis tries warning Deborah Strode of the shape's escape, but she responds with hysterics. He next visits the murder house, where he has a brief but terrifying encounter with the shape. This quick visit ends with Brackett angrily arresting Loomis for upsetting Deborah. I know who you are, Loomis, and I don't need to know you personally to know I don't like you at all. Sheriff Hall believes Loomis's hunch to be worth checking out and joins them out on patrol, but not before ordering Brackett to remain at the station to cool down. As night falls on Haddonfield, the shape attacks Tara and her friends, slaughtering them in grisly fashion. Returning to his hotel room, Loomis tries sketching the netherworld from his earlier vision. He plays back one of his taped consultation sessions with Jennifer, focusing on her words as she speaks of the veil between worlds. Closing his eyes, Loomis finds himself standing in this netherworld, known here as the liminal. He's quickly attacked by the young boy from the opening, which jolts him back to reality. Just then, he receives a call from Smith's Grove. Staff had made an unsettling discovery within the Boogeyman's burned cell. The dead body of a nurse and a name written countless times in smeared blood. Loomis. With this, a haunting laughter drowns out the call. Loomis tries another phone, but the laughter is inescapable. It's on every phone line. The veil separating the worlds has begun to tear apart. Alarmingly, this event causes ravens to fall from the sky in large numbers, dying instantly upon smashing into the ground. Elsewhere, Sheriff Hall checks on Annie and Kelly just as the shape attacks, wounding Annie. The girls manage to escape, though Hall is killed while defending them. Annie tries calling for help, but the phone lines are still overrun with laughter. With the veil thinning, Loomis manages to track Annie and Kelly by following their ethereal screams in the netherworld. Though he physically walks in reality, he's experiencing visions from the liminal. The girls escape to Tara's home, where they discover the mutilated corpses of Tara and her party friends. Concurrent with this, Deborah discovers Laurie's corpse. Just before the laughter drowns her out, she hysterically phones Brackett, who sets out into the night. The shape arrives at Tara's to terrorize the girls once more. Too injured to run any further, Annie helps Kelly escape to safety. Loomis arrives a moment later, but is unable to stop the shape from slitting Annie's throat and vanishing into the night. Brackett rushes in to find Loomis cradling his dying daughter. Overcome with anger and sadness, he shoots Loomis in the chest. As Loomis lies gasping for air, he has one final horrifying vision from the liminal. Too pained to speak, he silently mouths his wife's name. Back in Morton, Maria Loomis waits by the phone, having been unable to reach her husband for hours. A police cruiser belonging to Deputy Brackett pulls into her driveway. Maria hears a knock and goes to answer it. Opening the door, she screams. The door slams shut and the house goes silent. Only the sounds of the wind and rustling leaves remain. Next is The Witching Hour. The film begins with Loomis hospitalized at Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. A groggy Loomis wakes in his hospital bed after having been shot by Deputy Brackett. He suddenly hears the toy clown laughter from earlier outside his room and goes to investigate. At the end of the hallway, he sees his wife and son staring at him. Unaware of the danger they've encountered, he goes to them but is attacked by a child-sized shape in a clown costume. Multiple child shapes appear before him and join in the attack. Back in his hospital bed, Loomis is jolted awake from this nightmare. Now, in true reality, he's horrified to find the shape standing at the foot of his bed, holding the severed head of his wife. The slasher drops Maria's head on the bed and leaves. The story would then jump ahead a year to just before Halloween. Loomis has begun to suffer emotional and mental breakdowns in the wake of his wife's murder and son's disappearance, although he believes his son to be dead. In a reversal of his traditional role, the doctor has now become the patient. He's recently turned to a therapist in Chicago to help him work through these feelings of intense grief. Additionally, Loomis has become the target of an aggressive journalist hoping to crack a big story by digging into his past and the incident at Smith's Grove. Beyond these troubles, he's also become obsessed with further exploring the liminal. Hutchinson would go on to explain that certain people can see the liminal, Deborah and Annie, while certain others can see into it, Jennifer and Loomis. Loomis has gone beyond this and actually entered it, and we learn that his links to it go back into his Russellville childhood, which is why he was drawn to Jennifer in the first place. The curse of this sixth sense is that the seer is never in danger of the evil that flows into our world. Rather, it's those around them that suffer. This would explain why the shape goes after Maria and David and not Loomis himself. Similarly, the shape so easily murdered Laurie Strode because she wasn't among those who could see into the liminal. The film would see things get considerably worse for Loomis. While leaving a therapy session, he would spot the shape in the hallway of his therapist's downtown high-rise. Chasing him into the adjoining office, he would make an unsettling discovery: the long-dead body of his therapist's neighboring office tenant. Loomis would then notice a small hole in the wall that offers a voyeur's view of his therapist's office. With this, a grim realization sets in. The shape has been eavesdropping on his therapy sessions for the past year. He knows Loomis's greatest fears and deepest secrets. The chase resumes and culminates up on the roof, where the boogeyman dangles Loomis over the edge by the throat. He doesn't kill him, however, for there is a worse fate in store. Loomis has started hearing the voice of his son David, just as he heard the laughing clown in Rise. This gives him hope that he is somehow still out there and alive. As night falls over Chicago, Loomis pursues this voice into the liminal and makes a gruesome and unsettling discovery: the dead and supernaturally distorted body of his missing son. As Loomis loses control, the forces around him cause him to mentally experience his son's prior death at the shape's hands. Spiritually crushed by this loss, he'll soon realize that his therapist has also betrayed him. It's in this highly emotional state that Loomis confronts and murders her, transforming him into what he had previously hunted and despised: a killer. The film ends just as it began, with the visual of the dead woman's body floating down the Chicago River. It's only now that we realize this is the murdered therapist. Finally, the fires of Samhain. The film opens with a terrified Deborah Strode in her home on October 27th, 1 year after the witching hour. The veil is thinner than ever, birds are already falling from the sky, and Deborah's protective dogs are horrifically smashing their heads into the walls. The Shape murders Deborah's police protection before burning her alive, very much like Alice Brackett at the end of Hutchinson's Halloween 3D. We continue on Halloween and find Loomis living as a fugitive from the law, since after all he did murder his own therapist in the last installment. Having grown up in Russellville, he returns here hoping to better understand his past. He immediately runs into Lee Brackett, who is now sheriff of Russellville. Unlike their last encounter in Rise of the Boogeyman, Brackett is sympathetic towards Loomis in this story and an ally of sorts. He's since come to realize that Loomis was only trying to save his daughter's life that Halloween night, and that shooting him in the chest was probably the wrong move. In a goodwill gesture, Brackett returns Loomis's lighter from the story despite it still technically being evidence, as the last gift his wife gave him before her untimely death, and the flame that set the Shape free. The lighter carries a special significance. Speaking of Brackett, Hutchinson reveals that Annie did not die in Rise of the Boogeyman as previously thought. We now find her living in Russellville as a strong single mother, but also a bit of a loner. Across the past year, Loomis has begun to suffer terrible visions of the Shape's murders before he commits them, not unlike Jamie Lloyd in Halloween 5. He's seen Deborah's unexpected death and now repeatedly sees Annie in these premonitions, leading him to believe she's in danger. The Shape is at his strongest, and there is no need for those that see him to remain alive. Loomis figures that saving Annie just might be his first step on the road to redemption. As for the Shape, he's not done with Loomis yet. Having gone after his family in Rise of the Boogeyman and his sense of self in The Witching Hour, he'll now go after Loomis's past in Russellville. At Smith's Grove Sanitarium, the patients are again in mass seizure, as the liminal breaks through around them, controlling them with a shared purpose. Breaking into Smith's Grove using an ambulance, the Shape unleashes the entire patient population. Beholden to his influence, they rip apart bedsheets and pillowcases to form crude masks and escape into the night. This Shape army then engages in a murder spree across the town of Russellville, killing everyone they encounter and destroying the town and people Loomis once knew. The Shape then focuses his own hunt on Annie. With the town under nightmarish attack, Brackett teams with Loomis in an effort to find the real Shape, though he dies saving Loomis from the patient horde. Elsewhere, Annie and her child take refuge with other townsfolk in a large dance hall. These locals eventually figure out that Annie can see the liminal in ways they cannot and deem her a witch, which she technically is. They're about to cast her out when the horde breaks into the dance hall, resulting in an all-out battle. Possessing Mom's strength, Annie takes out several Shape clones in defense of her little one. She manages to wound the actual Shape for the first time, a wound which Loomis himself feels. It's here that Loomis has a startling epiphany. He realizes that given how connected they've now become, he will need to die in order to stop the Shape. With this, Loomis becomes one with the liminal and starts to see it as never before. In fact, he begins to gaze into alternate dimensions, each with their own unique shape. In one dimension, Halloween 78's Shape is breaking through a closet door to get Laurie Strode. In another dimension, it's Halloween 4's Shape. In yet another, it's Rob Zombie's Shape attacking someone. Some dimensions contain shapes we've never even seen before. From this, Loomis realizes that everyone has a shape. This dimension's boogeyman just happens to be his own. Back in reality, Annie is now besieged from all sides as she fights off the real Shape. Using the lighter, Loomis sets himself on fire, just as Jennifer did years before outside the murder house. Concurrent with his death, the swarm of mind-controlled Shapes slit their own throats all throughout the burning town of Russellville. The resulting blood flow is so extreme that the hills literally run red. The trilogy ends on Annie standing amid this massive scale carnage. Well, this movie series would have undoubtedly been the death of the fucking Halloween franchise. Never have I heard of something so ungodly stupid and ludicrous in regards to this series. Introducing supernatural bullshit and multiverse crap into the Halloween franchise is so fucking stupid. I think this idea could have worked, maybe if Halloween was not attached to this idea, but even then, I think that's giving it too much credit. This entire trilogy is built on the idea of subverting expectations. Loomis isn't the Shape's doctor, Michael Myers isn't the killer, Laurie dies less than halfway into the first movie, the kid dies instead of the babysitter, which I do weirdly appreciate though. Loomis doesn't kill the Shape with 6 shots, Brackett shoots Loomis, all of it. With that, this essentially would have been the last Jedi of the Halloween franchise, subverting every expectation for the sake of subverting expectations instead of actually doing something interesting. The liminal is fucking stupid and seems like at the time, proto Upside Down, which furthers my thoughts on how this could have been relatively fine if it wasn't connected to Halloween. The first film would have been undoubtedly stupid, but the second film seems kind of weak and there isn't much to it. I know it's only a rough outline, but the third film seems like there's more bite to it when it has the same type of rough outline. I like the idea of Loomis being the central character, but without Donald Pleasence, I don't know if it would have worked as well, especially when Hutchinson wanted Cillian Murphy for the role. But I like the idea of him and the Shape being more so connected than just doctor and patient. I also like the fear factor of the Shape not being Michael, just some random kid that maybe got possessed by this nether realm and became the ultimate evil. I don't like the idea of this ultimate evil actually being explained though, because it does ruin the idea you had going for it with not explaining the person in question, but you explaining the thing that's corrupted him? Kind of idiotic. It also doesn't help that the multiverse aspect makes no fucking sense in terms of what Hutchinson wanted to do with it. According to him, he wanted to free up everything and legitimized all sequels. The problem with that is, they already are legitimized, you dumb fuck! Oh, just because you have multiple shapes on screen that somehow makes the movies that already exist more exist? Nothing is stopping people from making movies that are sequels to any movie in this franchise. Because these movies all still exist, they didn't go away when a new timeline was invented. They are there for the taking. The reason we don't is because no one wants to see a sequel to the Thorn Saga. No one wants to see a sequel to Resurrection. No one wants to see a Halloween 3 by Rob Zombie. Just because they don't happen doesn't mean they aren't possible. This trilogy would have just reaffirmed an idea that is already there. It also doesn't help that Hutchinson talks about himself and his idea as the greatest thing on God's green earth, as well as unanimous praise for Mustafa Akkad, which I still don't understand, but that's a rant for another day. So why weren't these made? Well, we will once again blame Dimension for this, but at this point I'm kind of thankful they were so picky because this probably would have been trash. They simply didn't want to remake Halloween so soon after Zombies version, as well as greenlighting not just one film, but 3. It wasn't Halloween 2018 that if that film didn't do well, it could have just ended there. This was built on the idea that all 3 had to be made. Investing that much into a gamble and something not at all safe in terms of narrative and what we had seen before was ridiculous. It didn't help that despite doing a lot for the franchise in terms of extended media, Hutchinson didn't have enough credits in terms of film. Malik Akkad did respond favorably, but in the end, that didn't matter. So, moving on to the next one. Next is another version of Halloween Asylum written by Josh Stolberg and Pete Goldfinger in 2013. After only one draft, Matt Venn's Halloween Asylum from 2005 was dead in the water because of the reasons I stated before. However, that didn't stop Weinstein from trying to capitalize on it. Dimension exec Matt Siner started meeting with writers, and he eventually got 2 writers, Josh Stolberg and Pete Goldfinger, the former of which wrote the better Halloween Hellraiser crossover in 2002. They met with Siner and discussed various pitches. Siner was impressed, so he got them a meeting with Malik Akkad, who liked them as writers, but not necessarily their ideas. On the Dimension side of things, they were looking for writers to rewrite an old script, which turned out to be Venn's Asylum script. The reasoning, or at least the rumor was that Weinstein was allured by the idea of a movie set entirely in Smith's Grove. So Asylum was brought back, and Venn didn't want to be a part of it, so Stolberg and Goldfinger came in to rewrite the entire script. Asylum 2013 opens on Halloween night in Covington, Indiana. A group of fun-loving teens, including 17-year-old Bethany, are trespassing at a remote farmhouse believed to be the birthplace of Michael Myers. As it turns out, the slasher is currently living here and murders all but Bethany, who manages a narrow escape. The story then shifts to Smith's Grove Sanitarium this same night. Here we meet fame-chasing Dr. Cushing along with several grad students. The smart and likable Callie, her promiscuous bestie Stephanie, and hopeless nerd Brenner. Sanitarium staff witness a news report of Bethany's brush with the Shape, which prompts a massive manhunt. Cushing tells police Michael will head for either the Myers house, the Strode house, or Smith's Grove. Callie believes differently, predicting that he will go after Bethany to finish the kill. Stephanie bails on giving Callie a ride home, forcing her to accept a ride from Wyatt, visiting a brother to one of her patients. Upon discussing the situation, they agree to drive to Covington to warn Bethany that Michael may still come after her. Wyatt jokes about this being a strange first date. After discerning Bethany's home address, the pair arrive to find the Shape in mid-attack. Callie calls 911 as she and Wyatt rush in to help. The Shape kills Bethany, knocks Wyatt unconscious, and is about to murder Callie when police arrive in full force. They quickly put a bullet in the slasher's kneecap before launching a merciless baton assault. Eerily, the Shape never takes his eyes off Callie, even while being beaten senseless. We then jump ahead 2 years to October 30th, 2015. Callie is now engaged to Wyatt, and she remains an intern at Smith's Grove Sanitarium, alongside Stephanie and Brenner. The asylum is once again home to Michael Myers, who has been sentenced to death for his crimes. Unfortunately, the governor has ordered a ban on all executions beginning November 1st. State officials have announced their decision not to execute Michael prior to the ban, resulting in considerable public outcry. Smith's Grove director Edward Phelps is especially eager to carry out the death sentence, which he believes will boost his upcoming bid for the governorship. The issue, however, is that all current executions require authorization from the sitting governor. Against the advice of Security Supervisor James Enzor and District Attorney Daniel Hawthorne, Phelps decides to execute Michael on October 31st at Smith's Grove without authorization. He's backed by Dr. Cushing, who plans to extract Michael's brain for scientific research. A former warden, Phelps quietly imports an electric chair from a federal facility. To prevent news of Michael's execution from leaking out, he orders a facility lockdown and jams all cell phone signals. The guards taunt and torture the Shape prior to his execution, even flaunting his old mask in front of him. They strap him into the chair and place a black hood over top his face. At 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before the governor's ban takes effect, the switch is engaged. However, the execution goes awry, and the Shape breaks free from the chair. The reason being for this escape is that he's now supernaturally empowered by the enormous jolts of electricity. He murders the attending guards and several witnesses, regaining his classic mask in the process. Security Supervisor Enzor and Intern Brenner are also soon murdered. Rather than call for outside help, Director Phelps decides to personally hunt down and execute the Shape within Smith's Grove, which is still under lockdown. The escaped slasher confronts Dr. Cushing, who begs for his life to no avail. "It's after midnight, Michael. They can't execute you anymore. It's going to be okay." Grabbing the skull saw intended for his own autopsy, the Shape murders Cushing in gory fashion. Phelps and District Attorney Hawthorne trick Callie and Stephanie into going into the facility's basement, known as Homicide Hall, by insisting there's a tunnel through which they can escape. Their actual plan is to use the girls as bait to lure the Shape, whom they'll follow after and kill. This plan goes poorly, resulting in the hospital's most dangerous patients escaping their underground cells. They initially try to overpower Michael, who slashes through them all, and Phelps with horrifying ease. Retreating into the Hall of Records, Callie finds an audio tape of an old therapy session between Dr. Loomis and a young Michael. Playing it works as an effective distraction, allowing her to strike. A nasty fight ensues, resulting in the deaths of Stephanie and Wyatt, the latter of whom snuck into the facility hoping to save his fiancée. Callie ultimately prevails after seriously wounding her adversary multiple times. Authorities move in and recapture Michael, ultimately returning him to his old room. At Wyatt's funeral, a mourner comments on Michael's fate. "It's just a shame the deadline's passed. Now, maybe, he'll never die." The final shot is of Michael sitting quietly in his cell. Script: Michael is home. This one is really not that great. I felt that the two previous Asylum versions, mainly Ven's original, since the other one was just coincidentally called Asylum, were much better. This pretty much felt like less of a prison movie set in the Halloween universe and more so, hey, what if we took the brutality and edgy crap of the zombie films and applied it to this actually good script and make it shitty? Because that's how I felt when reading this. It tries so hard to make it incredibly dark and brutal, even for a Halloween movie. It doesn't help that after Michael gets electrocuted, he becomes Super Shape and essentially becomes Jason, which I fucking hate. Then you have Michael being born evil at some farmhouse in the middle of buttfuck nowhere because reasons. Instead of this 6-year-old just snapping for no reason, they had to make him born evil. Because, again, reasons. All the characters are horribly unlikable. I guess just to root for Michael. And I also don't like how Dr. Cushing is incredibly unlikable, even though he shares his name with a horror icon. Seems demeaning to poor Peter, doesn't it? The final girl is fine, but not incredibly memorable. This just seems ridiculous and a way to cash in on the zombie movies, even though it was 4 years since the last one. Did not really care for this one. So why wasn't this made? It received positive feedback, like they all do, but this time with notes. Apparently Weinstein was the guy that wanted the Super Shape to be in the final film despite not being in the original concept for the rewrite. Eventually, this specific version lost its luster and kinda just faded away, whether that be because of Super Shape or something else. Eventually, the duo left the project and Andrew Dabb and Adam Glass were brought on to do rewrites of the material. Glass stated that of their time with it, they did a page 1 rewrite, worked on it for 5 weeks, and then left, and didn't hear from anyone again in regards to the project. He barely remembers anything about it, except that it was about a prison/asylum break. He also called Malik Akkad a nice guy, and it was clear that he wanted Halloween out of the hands of the Weinsteins so he could do the films on his own terms. Glass got a bottle of whiskey from Akkad, and that was the end of that. Finally, and I mean finally, is Halloween Returns by Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan in 2015. The Halloween franchise was a shit show at this point. Weinstein and Dimension were being finicky cunts about everything. Malik Akkad wanted to pull his hair out for working with these dumbasses for so long, and they still hadn't made a Halloween movie in, at this point, 5 years. Last we saw of the original Carpenter timelines was over a decade ago. So what the fuck do they do now? Well, Weinstein was trying his best to utilize Smith's Grove as a location for a film. On top of that, there were rumblings that Halloween 3D was finally happening, with Scout Taylor Compton going so far to tweet about coming back as Laurie, as well as the official site for Halloween showcasing a logo for a Halloween 3. Akkad said that they were working on it and wanted to bring it back to the roots of the older films while remaining in the zombie continuity. Eventually, on February 5th, 2015, it was announced by Hollywood Reporter that Melton and Dunstan would be writing the film. Their involvement was confirmed on June 15th that same year, and shooting was intended to start soon after. However, the major difference is that this wouldn't follow any timeline, but instead be a recalibration of the franchise, and be a sort of sequel to the original Halloween, with Gary Hunt being the focus, along with some teens who have connections to Michael Myers. Halloween Returns begins where the original Halloween ended, with the Shape having just been shot 6 times by Dr. Loomis. Escaping that encounter, the injured slasher continues to stalk Haddonfield's streets. He attacks a teenager named Karen who seeks refuge at the home of Deputy Gary Hunt. The deputy's wife lets Karen inside and dials 911, though the Shape soon forces his way in. He attacks both women, killing Mrs. Hunt in front of her 8-year-old son Noah. Karen manages another escape, though a large knife now protrudes from her back. The Shape follows her outside, but is immediately apprehended by Deputy Hunt and Dr. Paul Rogers of Smith's Grove. Rogers begs Michael to stop as he's killed everyone. With this, the Shape surrenders and is taken into custody. Dr. Rogers testifies in court that Michael Myers is sane enough to be tried for his crimes and must be put to death. 10 years later, we find the Shape on death row at the Warren County Correctional Center, his execution scheduled for the day before Halloween. Rogers' teenage daughter Sophia has begun to date a now teenage Noah Hunt, who desperately wants to watch the demise of his mother's killer. Sophia and Noah sneak into the prison for the midnight execution and unwittingly catch the Shape's attention from the audience. Sheriff Hunt, still angry and blaming Rogers for Michael's original escape, is also in attendance. Officials utilized an unconventional drug mixture to execute the slasher, which fails to do so and instead spikes his adrenaline. This enables the Shape to break free and slaughter a handful of guards and attendees. Meanwhile, a raging storm cuts power to the facility and causes a utility room to catch fire. The Shape escapes federal custody amid the widespread pandemonium, though prison officials believe him to have died in the blaze. Without a body, Hunt and Rogers refuse to believe the initial reports of Michael's death, with Halloween now in full swing. The two men begrudgingly team up to find him. Elsewhere, the Shape murders the owner of a novelty store and acquires a new white mask. While doing so, Hunt and Rogers discover a stolen police cruiser near the prison with Rogers' name entered into the address database. He calls home just in time to hear his wife being attacked by the escaped slasher. Arriving moments later, Rogers' wife dies in his arms. He and Hunt soon make a startling realization that their children were both at the execution and are now likely targets. With the sun setting on Halloween night, Hunt and Rogers race to find their kids before the Shape does. They eventually arrived at the youth's party destination, an old farmhouse adjacent to Farmer John's haunted pumpkin patch. By the time the fathers arrive, Sophia and Noah's friends are all dead. Inside the farmhouse, the Shape murders Sheriff Hunt, setting the structure ablaze in the process. Rogers rushes inside and distracts his former patient so that Sophia and Noah, both injured, can escape. Rogers remains inside to taunt the slasher as police arrive and surround the property. Throughout the billowing smoke, police spot the shape running from the house, blade in hand. They open fire and the figure drops to the ground. This turns out to be a diversion, however. Police unmask the slasher to find Rogers, his tongue split, and a giant glass shard impaled through his palm. The true escape has escaped into the night once more, but not before inscribing a message in blood on a farmhouse wall. This town will never be safe again. In a post-credit scene, a hospitalized Rogers recounts the ordeal to an unspecified calling, who comments, "You speak of Michael Myers as if he were just a man. He's not a man, Dr. Rogers. He never was. He's purely and simply evil." This is revealed to be Dr. Sam Loomis. Cut to black. I knew of this film way back when, because I vaguely remember when this was almost made since it was publicly acknowledged. I even talked about it, albeit briefly, in my Halloween 2018 review a couple years ago. I also want to recount that Halloween Retold, which I mentioned in that review, is no longer happening, and the only information I can find on it is through this weird website. So I don't know what the fuck is going to happen with that. Not like it really matters, because it's okay. I'm kind of on the fence with this one. Similar to Halloween 3.0, this would have been confusing for general audiences. Hell, I think hardcore fans would find this confusing. It talks about Halloween like it happened in 2005 when it didn't. I get they don't want to remake it, but that kind of just seems silly. Just make it a period piece that takes place in 1988 and it would be improved to an extent. Hell, a lot of the decisions made in this script could have easy fixes to them. I mean, look, I get why they did some retconning by having Dr. Rogers named suspiciously after the singer, and Gary Hunt tracking him as well, because Brackett and Loomis are well-known and beloved characters that they didn't want to recast. Meanwhile, Hunt was barely in Halloween 2, and not particularly memorable, and Rogers is an original character. I mean, they even retcon that Rogers was his doctor the whole time, and not Loomis. That's just ridiculous. Hell, a lot of this script is just ridiculous. Especially when they bring back Loomis anyway in a post-credit scene. And just like, what do you want to do? They upped the body count for no reason and changed things around. And then there was also another final girl with this Karen character. In the script, she's described as screaming and running away when Myers gets up from the 6 shots. Like, what is this movie? I get that they wanted to do their own thing, but also make a sequel, but you can't do both. The story is fine, the characters are rather memorable, and Michael is great as always, but the fact that they changed things around for no reason just seems ridiculous to me personally. It has some interesting ideas here and there, as well as a cool opening sequence, but for the most part, it's bombarded by dumb shit that would have had hardcore fans up in arms, and general audiences just perplexed by the whole endeavor. I do, however, appreciate that they canonize Harry Grimbridge and Silver Shamrock from Halloween 3. So, why wasn't this made? Well, similar to the first Halloween 3D, this actually got close to being made. It entered pre-production with some crew signing on, and it was set to be filmed in Louisiana in late June, early July. Dustin even stated that he wanted Gillian Jacobs in the lead role. But in October, Malik Akkad announced that they would not be going ahead with this version, mainly due to some strife with Dimension on the direction of the film. Yeah, surprise, surprise. But also having to step back and try to reconfigure the franchise. However, even bigger news came a few months later when in the final days of 2015, it was announced that Dimension had finally lost the rights to the franchise due to the lack of a movie in 6 years.
Yes! Yeah!
With this, it went back to Miramax, which had been sold to Film Yard, who then sold their interest to Be In Media. Right around the time that Halloween 2018 came out, Malik Akkad laid into Dimension and even stated they wanted Halloween Returns to film in Serbia to take advantage of tax breaks, and Akkad refused, stating that this very American franchise should not be shot in Europe. Which is ironic considering a franchise with an actual American location in the name gets shot in fucking Beirut. Eventually, David Thwaites would head a new Halloween production and agreed with Akkad that the Halloween franchise needed to move into a new direction. So they contacted Blumhouse founder Jason Blum, and they all contacted John Carpenter, who joined the film, so he didn't have to see another Halloween film ruined on his watch. Eventually, we got Halloween 2018, which was easily the second best film in the franchise, followed by a decent yet disappointing follow-up, and then the final film in the saga being released a couple days ago. And that is the end of that. For now. Because remember,
You can't kill the boogeyman.
but that ends my very, very, very long videos about this topic. This took a lot of work and was very annoying at times, but unlike 31 videos in a month, I could afford to put a lot of time and effort into these 2 videos, and they're videos I'm proud of. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the rest of Monster Madness 6.